The watch hit the floor of Harbor Haven's back office at 11:47 p. Not dropped, placed, deliberately, by a man who smiled while he did it. Baek Do-yun set it down on the worn carpet beside an unconscious woman's coat pocket with the careful patience of someone who had rehearsed this exact movement 100 times. The watch was a Patek Philippe, cream-faced, worth more than most people earned in a year. He pressed it gently into the lining until the shape disappeared. Then he straightened his jacket, walked to the office door, and nodded once to the man standing in the hallway. 30 seconds later, the police arrived. Do-yun did not wait to watch them find it. He was already in his car, driving north along the wet Seattle waterfront, checking his phone for a name he already knew would appear in the call log before morning. Kwon Si-hyeon. He needed that name to surface again. And now it would. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you convinced yourself every secret you kept from them was an act of protection, this story will cost you something. Because sometimes the cruelest thing a person can do to someone they love is decide, without hence how much truth they deserve to know. Stay with this story. Every part of it matters. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it. Now hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode of what's coming next, because this story only gets more complicated and more painful from here. Hit the like button if you're already feeling it, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the night that changed everything. The call came at 11:52 p.m. Si-hyeon was still awake. He was almost always still awake at that hour, which was one of the reasons Imani had eventually stopped trying to understand him and started trying to survive living with him instead. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 34th floor, watching rain move across Elliott Bay in slow diagonal sheets. The lights of the port were blurred and orange. Container ship was being guided into berth by two small tugs, their work patient and mechanical, and Si-hyeon had been watching that process for nearly 20 minutes, without thinking about anything in particular. That was the version of himself he had built since the divorce. A man who could watch ships dock and not think. His phone was on the kitchen counter. He heard it from across the room, not a text tone, which he could ignore, but an actual call, which almost nobody made to that number anymore. He looked at the screen. Seattle Police Department. He answered it before the second ring finished. The officer on the other end was professional and brief. There was a woman in custody at the King County Processing Center. Her name was Imani Caldwell. She had listed this number as an emergency contact, which was. The officer paused for just a fraction of a second, probably reading something on his screen somewhat unusual, given that her most recent address listed an apartment in Capitol Hill, and her emergency contact information had apparently not been updated in the past several months. Si-hyeon said he understood. He said he would come. He was already moving before the call ended, pulling his jacket from the back of the chair near the entryway, with the kind of automatic efficiency that came from years of being the person other people called when something went wrong. His keys were in his left hand. His phone was in his right. He was in the elevator before he had fully processed the thing that was wrong about everything the officer had just told him. Imani had not called him. He had not spoken to Imani Caldwell Imani Kwon for 4 years of a marriage that had produced no children and ended in a mutual silence that hurt more than any argument they had ever had in 3 months. Since the morning she signed the last of the divorce paperwork and walked out of his attorney's office without looking back at him. He had watched her go from across the lobby. He had not followed her. That restraint had cost him something he still had not fully measured. She had not called him tonight. Someone had given the police his number and made sure they called it. He sat with that knowledge in the back car on the way to the processing center and turned it over carefully, the way he had turned over every piece of information that felt like it was presented to him by someone else's hand. In his world, accidents were rare. Coincidences were almost non-existent. When something appeared to happen by chance, it was usually because someone had invested significant effort in making it appear that way. Imani Caldwell, arrested at Harbor Haven, he knew the shelter. It operated in the Soto district, not far from his logistics offices. He had written a donation check to its board two years ago, at Imani's request, when she had briefly volunteered there between consulting projects. He had not thought about Harbor Haven since. He tried to remember if Imani had ever mentioned returning to volunteer work there. He could not recall her saying so. 3 months of silence. And now this. The processing center smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and old coffee. The officer at the front desk was a young woman with tired eyes who processed Si-yeon's identification with the mechanical competence of someone who had done this job long enough to stop being surprised by who showed up to post bail for whom. She told him the amount. He paid it in cash, which she noted without comment. It took 40 minutes. Si-yeon sat on a plastic chair in the waiting area and did not look at his phone. He looked at the wall opposite him, a bulletin board covered in laminated notices about inmate rights and public defender contact information, and he thought carefully about the sequence of events that had led to this moment. He was good at this. It was one of the things about him that Imani had once described, in a rare moment of honesty during one of their last arguments, as both his most useful quality and the most exhausting thing about living with him. He could disassemble a situation into its component parts and locate the originating decision that had produced every subsequent consequence. Someone had wanted him here tonight. That was the originating decision. Everything else, Imani's arrest, the police call, the emergency contact number, those were the consequences. He heard a door open at the far end of the corridor and looked up. Imani walked out. She was wearing the same clothes she had apparently been arrested in, dark jeans, a gray wool coat, ankle boots. Her natural hair was pulled back from her face in a way that suggested she had dressed quickly and practically for whatever she had been doing tonight, not for a public appearance. She was 34 years old, and she looked it in the way that only meant she had been through real things, and those real things had left small marks on her, a sharpness around her eyes, a set to her jaw that had not been there when they first met. She scanned the waiting area the way people scan rooms when they're braced to handle whatever they find. She found him. Her expression did not change, not the way most people's expressions changed when they were surprised. A flicker, an opening, a moment of vulnerability before the composure reassembled. Imani had always been better at composure than almost anyone Si-hyeon had ever met in any context, which was remarkable given that most of the people he spent his professional life dealing with had spent decades cultivating exactly that quality. She walked toward him. He stood up. They stood 2 feet apart in the processing center waiting room of the King County Jail at 1:20 in the morning and looked at each other for the first time in 3 months. "I didn't call you," Imani said. "I know. Someone gave them your number." "I know that too." She looked at him for another moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not softness, not the thing he used to be able to read in her before she got skilled at keeping it out of her face. Something more like assessment. She was deciding something. "Car outside?" she asked. "Yes. Can we talk somewhere that isn't here?" "Yes." She walked past him toward the exit. Si-yeon followed. That was how it had always started with them, he thought. Her moving first. Him following, her being the one willing to walk toward the uncomfortable thing while he cataloged every possible threat in the surrounding environment and said nothing about any of it. Outside, the rain had lightened to a mist. Seattle at 1 in the morning was not quiet. The city never went fully quiet, not in the neighborhoods near the water, but the particular kind of noise that existed at this hour was muffled and distant. Imani stood on the sidewalk, outside the entrance, and turned to face him before he could direct her toward the car. "Before we go anywhere," she said, "I need to know something." "All right. Did you have anything to do with what happened tonight?" He looked at her without flinching. No. She studied his face. This was something she had always done when she asked him direct questions, not because she thought he was a reflexive liar, but because she had learned, over 4 years of marriage to a man who operated in a world built on controlled information, that there were many different kinds of honesty. She had gotten very good at reading the spaces between his words. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, you believe me. Or okay, you've decided to proceed as if you believe me." Something crossed her face that was almost a smile. "Both," she said, "depending on what happens next." They got in the car. Si-hyeon's driver, a compact Korean man named Jeong, who had worked for him for 11 years and who Imani had always liked despite herself, did not react to her presence except to nod slightly in the rearview mirror in a way that Si-hyeon recognized as genuine respect. Imani sat in the seat beside Si-hyeon, with her coat on and her hands in her lap, and stared out the window for nearly a minute before she spoke. "There's a diner," she said, "on Western. 24 hours. Can we go there?" Si-hyeon told Jeong. The diner was almost empty. A man in a reflective construction vest at the counter. Two young women in a booth near the back, sharing a plate of fries with the specific focused attention of people who had been crying and had decided to feed themselves instead. A server who was perhaps 60 years old, and who appeared entirely unbothered by two people walking in at 1:30 in the morning, one of whom had clearly just come from a holding facility. They took a booth near the window. The server brought them coffee without asking. Si-hyeon wrapped his hands around the mug and waited. "I went back to Harbor Haven about 6 weeks ago," Imani said. "To volunteer. I used to go on Saturday mornings, you know that. I started again because I needed something to do with myself that wasn't work." Si-hyeon nodded. He did not say that he hadn't known she had gone back. He hadn't, like Greenwood splitting, known, but saying so would have required explaining how he knew what she'd been doing in the 3 months since their divorce, and that conversation could wait. "I was helping Marcia, the office manager, she's been there for years, with their donation database. They got a new record-keeping system, and she doesn't like computers, so I was cleaning up the old data and migrating it." Imani paused, wrapped both hands around her own mug. "About 3 weeks ago, I found something in the financial records that didn't belong there." Si went very still. "Transfer logs," Imani continued. "Multiple transactions coming in labeled as charitable donations from shell companies. Small amounts individually, but the volume was significant when you looked at the pattern. They were being moved through Harbor Haven's accounts and then redistributed out again. The shelter was real, the clients were real, the programs were real, but someone was using the donation infrastructure to move money." "Did you tell anyone at the shelter?" "No." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I copied the records first. I didn't want to tell anyone until I understood what I was looking at. I put the files on an encrypted drive and I kept it in a storage locker over on First Ave. And then last week 2 men came to the shelter while I was there." Imani's voice stayed level, but her hands tightened on the mug. "They didn't identify themselves. They walked into the back office when I was alone, and one of them asked me what I had taken from the records. Not whether I had taken anything. What I had taken." She looked at him. "They already knew. What did you tell them?" "I told them I didn't know what they were talking about." She held his eyes. "And then I made myself stay completely calm, and I asked them to leave because I was going to call the shelter director. And they did. They left." Si-hyeon said nothing. He was listening to every word and simultaneously building the structure of what she was describing in a part of his mind that operated separately from the part of him sitting across from his ex-wife at 1:30 in the morning in a diner in Seattle. "Tonight I went back to get the drive," Imani said. "I was going to take it to a lawyer. I thought I'd waited long enough. When I got to Harbor Haven to get some paperwork I'd left there, I was going to do both in one trip. The 2 men were there again. Different location. Same question. They searched my coat while one of them held the door." Her voice did not waver, but something in her face tightened, almost imperceptibly. "They didn't find anything because the drive wasn't on me. And then the police arrived, and the officer found a watch in my coat pocket." She set her mug down. "A watch that was not there when those men searched me." The construction worker at the counter paid his bill and left. The bell over the door chimed once in the quiet. "Someone put it there," Si-hyeon said. "Yes, while the police were processing you. The only moment my coat was out of my direct control was when an officer took it during the search. And before that, one of those 2 men had his hands in both pockets." Imani looked at him steadily. "They didn't find the drive, so they decided to use me as a pressure point instead." She paused. "Pressure point on someone. I don't have expensive watches. I don't steal. Anyone who knows anything about me knows that. They weren't creating a credible theft charge," Si-hyeon said. "They were creating a reason to call me." Imani looked at him. Really looked at him. The way she used to when she was deciding how much of what she was thinking to say out loud. You already knew that, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I suspected it from the moment they told me you hadn't made the call yourself. Who are they? She kept her voice low and even. What do they want with you? Si-hyeon picked up his coffee and drank some of it. It was bad coffee, the kind of bad, that came from a machine that was cleaned once a week on a good week, and he drank it anyway because the familiar bitterness gave his hands something to do while he arranged what he was about to say. Did you see a name in those financial records? He asked. Anything that looked like an individual, not a company? Imani was quiet for a moment. There was a name that appeared in the earliest transfer documentation, she said slowly. Not prominently. Buried in a footnote of a supporting document. I almost missed it. Baek Do-yeon, she said. The name landed in the quiet of the diner, and Si-yeon felt something shift in the base of his chest. Not surprise exactly, but the specific sensation of a suspicion being confirmed that he had hoped would not be confirmed. You know that name, Imani said. Yes, who is he? Si-yeon set his mug down. Outside, the mist had thickened again, and the lights along Western Avenue blurred softly in the wet air. He looked at his ex-wife, this woman he had married and hidden things from and lost, and was apparently not yet finished with, and he thought about how to answer her question in a way that was honest and complete, and did not. Immediately put her in more danger than she was already in. He thought about it, and then he did something he had not done enough of in 4 years of marriage. He told her the truth without editing it first. Baek Do-yeon is a fixer, Si-hyeon said. Korean-American. He's been operating in the Pacific Northwest for about 8 years. He moves between legitimate companies, private security, financial networks, and organized crime. He doesn't belong to any single organization. He works for whoever pays him, and he knows enough about everyone's business to make himself very difficult to touch. He paused. He knows a great deal about my organizations specifically, about its history, about certain structures within it that I have never made public. He looked at her. He doesn't want you, Imani. He wanted me to know you were involved. He needed me to come to you. Imani was quiet. She turned her coffee mug in a slow circle on the table, the ceramic scraping softly against the laminate. Because he thinks I have something he wants, she said. Yes, the drive. Not only the drive, she stopped turning the mug. Her eyes came up to his. Si-hyeon breathed in slowly. There are things about our marriage that I need to explain to you, he said. Things I should have explained before we ended it. Before we ended a lot of things. Imani did not look away from him. Her expression was careful and controlled, and underneath the careful control there was something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was perhaps the specific feeling a person has when they realize they were right about. Something they had always hoped they were wrong about. You kept things from me, she said. Yes. Things that were dangerous. Yes. She nodded very slowly. Not in agreement, in acknowledgement, the way she nodded when she was recording something for future reference. All right, she said finally. Her voice was quiet and very steady. Then we're going to deal with Do-yeon. And while we're doing that, you're going to tell me everything. Not the version you've decided I can handle everything. She held his gaze. If that's not something you can do, tell me now, and I'll find another way to handle this. Si-hyeon looked at his ex-wife in the bad light of a 24-hour diner at nearly 2 in the morning and thought about the man he had been for most of their marriage, the man who had believed that keeping the dangerous truth at own distance was the same as keeping the person he loved safe. He thought about what that belief had cost them. He thought about how much it had cost her specifically to carry the weight of a life she hadn't been allowed to fully understand. I can do that, he said. Can, Imani said, or will? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee and drank the rest of it, set the mug down decisively, and looked out the window at the rain-softened city beyond the glass. Then we need to talk about the drive, she said. And we need to do it carefully, because if those men were watching the shelter tonight, they may already know about the storage locker. Si-hyeon nodded. He was already thinking about the sedan he had noticed 2 blocks back on the drive, overparked, engine off, facing the direction they had come from. with no logical reason to be where it was at this hour. He had not mentioned it to Imani. That was, he recognized immediately, exactly the kind of decision she was talking about. The kind that had dismantled their marriage, one careful omission at a time. There was a car, he said, following us from the processing center. I didn't say anything. Imani looked at him. I'm saying it now, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, and then slowly, something that was not quite forgiveness and not quite relief moved across her face and settled into something more like determination. Okay, she said, so we have a problem, and we're going to figure out how to handle it together. She paused. Together means you don't make decisions without telling me. Not one, not even small ones. Understood, Si-hyeon said. I'm not asking if you understand, she said. I'm asking if you can live with it. Those are different things. Kwon Si-hyeon, who had spent 20 years making unilateral decisions in rooms where the consequences fell on other people, looked at the woman who had once loved him enough to tell him exactly what he was, and said, I'm going to have to learn. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 4 years, Imani said. Outside, the rain came down on the Seattle waterfront, and the night moved slowly toward morning. And somewhere in the city, a man named Baek Do-yeon was waiting for the call that would tell him his plan had worked. He was right that it had worked. He was wrong about what Si-hyeon would do next. Jeong drove without being told where to go. That was something Imani had never entirely gotten used to during the marriage. The way Si-hyeon's people operated on anticipation rather than instruction, reading the room before the room had fully formed. Jeong simply pulled away from the diner's curb at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual, took the first 2 turns without signaling, and within 90 seconds had changed their direction entirely. Imani watched the side mirror. He's good, she said, not as a compliment, exactly. More as an acknowledgement of a fact she wished were less familiar to her. He is, Si-hyeon said. Is the car still there 2 blocks back? It picked us up again after we left the diner. Si-hyeon did not look at the mirror. He was watching the street ahead with the specific quality of attention that Imani remembered. Not anxious, not heightened, just deeply present. Like a man reading a document he had read many times before and was checking for changes. They're not trying to stay hidden. They want me to know they're there. Why? Because the point isn't surveillance. The point is pressure. Imani turned away from the mirror and faced forward. Her hands were in her lap, and she was keeping them still through conscious effort. She had discovered, somewhere in the middle of the night she had just lived through, that the thing fear did to her body was make her hands want to move to grip something, to do something, and that resisting that impulse required a level of deliberate physical management she found exhausting. She was already tired. It was past 2 in the morning, and she had spent 4 hours in a holding facility, and she had just agreed to handle something very dangerous in partnership with her ex-husband. And her body was registering all of that in the way bodies registered things when the adrenaline had finished burning through and left only the aftermath. Where are we going? She asked. My building, Si-hyeon said. Unless you object. She thought about objecting. She ran through the alternatives: her apartment in Capitol Hill, which those men likely already knew about, a hotel, which would require a paper trail, anywhere else in this city at 2 in the morning with a car following them. I don't object, she said. But I want that stated clearly as a practical decision, not as anything else. Understood. And I want my own room. There are 4 bedrooms, Si-hyeon said. Take whichever one you want. She looked at him. He was looking out the window. His jaw was set in the way she recognized. Not anger, but the particular tension of a man running multiple calculations simultaneously and not liking several of the results. She had spent 4 years learning to read that jaw. It was, she thought with a complicated feeling, she did not examine too closely. Strange how quickly the reading came back. Jeong pulled into the underground parking structure of Si-hyeon's building, and the sedan did not follow. Couldn't. The entrance required a key card and a code that changed weekly. Imani climbed out of the car in the cold concrete-smelling quiet of the garage and followed Si-hyeon to the elevator. And it was only when the elevator doors closed, and they were alone in the small mirrored space, that she felt the full weight of what the last 6 hours had been. She leaned against the back wall, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then opened them. Si-hyeon was watching her. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to say something about whether I was all right." Pause. "Yes, I'm not all right. I'm exhausted and I'm angry and I'm handling both of those things adequately. You don't need to manage it." Something moved across his face that she couldn't immediately name. Not quite pain, not quite recognition. Something between the two. "I know," he said. "Do you?" The elevator opened on the 34th floor. The penthouse was the same. That was the first thing Imani registered. Not a specific object or detail, but the overall sameness of a space she had spent 2 years moving through, and that had apparently continued existing exactly as it was after she stopped being a part of it. The wide windows showing the rain-blurred city. The kitchen with its commercial-grade surfaces that Si-hyeon used maybe 3 times a week. The low couch in dark gray that she had picked out from a showroom in Belltown, while Si-hyeon stood beside her and said nothing about any of the options, and then agreed immediately to whichever she chose, which she had found charming at first. Understood was one of the ways he ceded control in small domestic areas, so that no one could accuse him of controlling everything. She sat down on that couch now in her wool coat and did not take her coat off because she was cold and because keeping it on felt like maintaining some version of a boundary between herself and the familiarity of this room. Si-hyeon came back from the kitchen with water for both of them and sat in the chair across from her, the chair not the couch beside her, which she noticed and did not comment on. "Tell me about Baek Do-yeon," she said. "All of it. Not the version you started at the diner. The version you didn't say yet." Si-yeon drank some water, set the glass down on the low table between them with a small, precise click. Do-yeon spent 6 years working for a financial group in Vancouver that handled asset placement for several organized crime networks in the Pacific Northwest, including mine. He was good at it. He understood both the legitimate and illegitimate sides of large-scale financial movement, which made him useful in ways that someone purely criminal could not be. He knew how to make money look like it had come from somewhere it hadn't. "A launderer," Imani said, among other things. About 4 years ago, his relationship with the Vancouver group ended badly. I don't know all the details. I know there was a dispute over money and that he left with information he shouldn't have had. Si-hyeon looked at her steadily. "Including information about certain structural elements of my organization. Specifically, about a legal instrument I had established to manage the transition of certain assets." Imani felt something tighten in her chest, not quite a premonition. More like the body's acknowledgement that the next thing it was about to hear was going to matter in a significant way. What kind of legal instrument? Si-hyeon was quiet for a moment. Not the hesitation of someone deciding whether to lie. The hesitation of someone choosing the precise, honest words for something they had never said out loud before. "A family trust," he said, "designed to hold the controlling authorization for the legitimate corporate structure of my organization. Haedong Meridian Group in, a way that prevented any single faction from seizing it if I were incapacitated or removed. It had to have multiple authorization points. One primary, which was me. And one secondary," he stopped. Imani waited. The rain moved against the windows in the silence. "The secondary authorization," she said slowly, "was registered to someone without their knowledge." Si-hyeon said nothing. "Was it me?" Her voice came out level. She had not expected it to come out level. Si-hyeon. "Was the secondary authorization registered to me?" "Yes," he said. The word sat in the room. Imani set her water glass down. Very carefully. She placed both hands flat on her knees, and she breathed in through her nose, and she looked at the floor for a moment before she looked back up at him. "You registered me as the legal safeguard for your criminal empire," she said, "without telling me. The organization is not—"
Don't.
Her voice was not raised. It was something worse than raised. It was completely controlled and absolutely precise. "Don't tell me about the distinction between the legitimate and illegitimate sides right now. Answer the question." "Yes," Si-hyeon said again. "I registered you without telling you. Because at the time, I believed it was the safest configuration. You had no awareness of the criminal components, which meant if anyone ever challenged the trust structure, you had clean hands. You couldn't testify against something you didn't know existed. You made me a legal actor in your organization's structure, Imani said, and told yourself it was protection. Yes, and Duyan knows about the trust. He has documentation of it. Which means he knows that you, specifically, secondary authorization rights. He may believe that authorization gives you access to certain assets or information that he wants. Si-hyeon held her gaze. You were recruited to Harbor Haven specifically because you were once Mrs. Kwon. He needed to find out what you knew and what you could access. Imani stood up. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the city. Her reflection was faint in the glass, the suggestion of her face, her coat, the rigid line of her shoulders. She stood like that for a long time. Si-hyeon did not speak. He did not move. He sat in the chair across the room and waited with the specific quality of stillness that he had always been capable of, the kind that other people found unnerving and that Imani had once found oddly comforting, before she understood that it wasn't peace. It was practice. I need you to understand something, Imani said to the glass. When I left you, when I signed those papers and walked out, she stopped. Started again. It wasn't because I stopped loving you. You know that. Si-hyeon said nothing. It was because I realized I was living in a house where I didn't have access to the full blueprint. I kept finding rooms I didn't know existed, and every time I found one, you would explain why it had been necessary to keep it from me. And the explanation was always, she stopped again. Jaw tightened. The explanation was always that it was for my protection. That knowing would have put me at risk. That your job was to manage the risk, so I didn't have to. Imani, and now you're telling me that the entire time, she said, and her voice was very quiet and very dangerous, you had put my name on a document that made me legally connected to your organization without my knowledge. While telling me it was safer for me not to know about your organization. She turned. Do you understand what that is? That's not protection. That's control. Those are not the same thing. Si-hyeon looked at her. His face was composed, and there was something underneath the composure that was not composed at all. Something that looked, Imani thought, like a man hearing the exact truth of something he had spent years telling himself was something else. I know, he said. Don't tell me you know. I don't want the concession. I want you to actually understand it. Because we're about to spend the next however many days dealing with the consequence of that decision, and I need to know that you understand what it cost. It cost us our marriage, Si-hyeon said. It cost me 4 years of my life inside a situation I was never given the full information to navigate, Imani said. The marriage was just the part you could see from the outside. The silence between them was different now, heavier. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but of people who had said the most significant truth and were now on the other side of it, standing in the wreckage of the saying. Si-hyeon stood up. He walked to the window, not to stand beside her, but to the adjacent panel 3 feet away, and looked out at the same rain-wet city. I'm going to fix the trust, he said. Remove your name from it entirely. Danielle Mercer. You know her? Imani blinked. The pivot was abrupt enough that it took her a moment to follow. Danielle, yes, from law school. We're not close, but I know her. She's a corporate attorney. She has handled some legitimate Haedong business in the past. She's formidable, and she has no loyalty to my organization beyond professional obligation. I want to involve her in this, officially, so that everything that happens next has a clean legal record. Imani stared at him. You want to bring in an attorney? Yes. Your instinct is to bring in an attorney instead of… She stopped. Instead of what? He said. She looked at him. Instead of whatever you would have done before. Question landed in a specific place. Si-hyeon turned slightly from the window. His expression was the careful, undramatic thing it always was, but his eyes were doing something complicated. What would I have done before? You know what you would have done. Tell me what you think. You would have found Do-yoon's people, Imani said. 2 men from the shelter. You would have found them, and you would have asked them questions until they answered, and then you would have made whatever problem they represented disappear in a way I wasn't supposed to know about. She kept her voice steady. And tomorrow morning you would have told me it was handled. And I would have known not to ask how. The rain tapped at the glass. Yes, Si-hyeon said. That is what I would have done. And now? Now I'm calling Danielle Mercer in the morning, he said. And we retrieve your drive through channels that produce a legal chain of custody. And we give that evidence to people with the authority to use it in a way that will actually destroy what Do-yeon has built. He looked at her directly. Which is the only method that protects you permanently. Disappearing his people only delays the problem. Imani watched him. She was looking for the version of this she couldn't trust. The tactical explanation that was really a manipulation, the reasonable sounding plan that concealed some part of the control she had just finished, telling him she would not accept again. She watched him for a long time. She found something unexpected. She found a man who looked genuinely tired. Not physically tired, though she suspected he was that too. Tired like green wood splitting, tired in the way that people got when they had been maintaining a posture for a very long time, and were considering, for the first time, the effort it had cost them. All right, she said. All right, you believe me, or... Both, she said, again, a pause. Don't make me regret it. She went to bed in the easternmost guest room. The sheets were clean. Jong, or someone like Jong, maintained this apartment with the same patient efficiency they brought to everything in Si-hyeon's orbit, and the room smelled faintly of cedar and nothing personal. Imani lay on her back in the dark and listened to the rain, and thought about the encrypted drive, sitting in some search locker on Foster Avenue, and about a man named Mike Baek Do-yeon, who had decided her life was a useful piece in someone else's game. She thought about the trust document. Her name on a piece of paper she had never seen, authorizing things she had never agreed to. She had married Kwon Si-hyeon because she loved him, his steadiness, his intelligence, the way he listened to her, like she was saying things worth hearing. She had not married him because of what he was. She had known what he was and chosen him anyway, which she had always understood was its own complicated thing. But she had believed that what she chose was a partnership. That the dangerous parts of his life existed in a separate space that she was allowed to stand beside without being embedded in. He had embedded her without asking, and he had told himself it was love. She fell asleep eventually, not peacefully, the kind of sleep that comes from a body that has simply run out of alternatives. She woke at 7 to her phone, buzzing on the nightstand. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. The voice on the other end was male, Korean accented, unhurried. Ms. Caldwell, I hope your night was comfortable. I understand the processing center can be quite unpleasant. Imani sat up. Her heart rate did not spike. It was the kind of moment where her body made a decision to stay operational rather than frightened, which she had learned about herself in a difficult period of her 20s, and had been both grateful for and unnerved by ever since. Who is this? She said. Someone who thinks you've been placed in an unfair situation, the voice said. You found records that don't belong to you. You're a bright woman. You knew what they meant. And now you're in a room in a building that belongs to a man who has always believed that the best way to keep something safe is to own it. A pause. I'm calling to offer you a different option. You framed me for theft, Imani said. You don't get to offer me options. That was a miscommunication. An associate acting with more enthusiasm than I authorized. The voice stayed smooth. Practiced. The voice of a man who had made this kind of call before. The watch situation has already been addressed. The charge will not survive the week. I could make that timeline faster, if we have a conversation. What kind of conversation? A simple one. You have files. I have an interest in those files. Everything else between us, including your ex-husband's involvement, irrelevant to me as long as I receive what I'm looking for. Imani stood up from the bed. She walked to the door, opened it, and moved down the hallway toward the living room, keeping her voice level. And what happens to me after you receive what you're looking for? You return to your life, Miss Caldwell, without anyone in it who means you harm. Including the man who just called me? A pause. Slightly longer than the ones before it. I won't pretend you're not intelligent enough to find that amusing. Good, because I am. She walked into the living room. Si-hyeon was already awake. He was standing in the kitchen with coffee, dressed, his phone on the counter in front of him. He looked up when she came in and read something in her face, and his own face went very still. "I'm going to be straightforward with you," she said, into the phone. "I don't have anything to give you. I'm going to handle what I found the way any reasonable person would handle it, through official channels. If you've done what you say and the charge doesn't survive, then we have nothing to discuss." She paused. "Don't call this number again." She ended the call. Si-hyeon looked at her across the kitchen counter. "Do-yun? Someone calling on his behalf, I think. Or him directly." She set the phone on the counter face up. "He knows I'm here." "Yes." Si-hyeon picked up his own phone. "He would know within an hour of when we arrived." "You should have told me that last night." He stopped. Looked at her. And then, a small thing, but she registered it. He said, "You're right." "I should have." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Coffee." Then we called Danielle. They drank coffee in the kitchen while rain moved against the windows, and Si-hyeon laid out what he knew about Do-yoon's operation with the methodical precision that Imani had always found both useful and faintly alarming, the way his mind moved. Through complex structures, the way other people moved through familiar rooms. He knew the names of 3 shell companies connected to Do-yoon's financial network. He knew 2 of the banks involved. He knew that the operation running through Harbor Haven was not the only laundry vehicle. There were at least 2 other charitable organizations in the region being used in the same way, though he didn't have documentation. "Why do you know this much about him?" Imani said at one point. "If he's not part of your organization." Si-hyeon looked at his coffee. "Because, in my world, the people who know your history are either in your organization, under your control, or a threat. Do-yun stopped being in my organization's orbit 4 years ago. He didn't go under anyone's control." He looked up. "So I tracked him." "You've been watching him for 4 years." "Monitoring, not actively watching." "Cyan," he said. "I've been watching him for 4 years." Imani absorbed this. "And you didn't, in 4 years of watching him, think that his knowledge of the trust structure posed a specific threat to me?" The pause before his answer was 1 second too long. "You thought it did," she said. "You knew it was a potential threat, and you didn't tell me. You were no longer involved with my organization. I thought distance was the best protection, and instead you left me walking around this city with my name attached to your legal documents and no idea it was there." Imani set her mug down. "This is what I'm talking about. This specific thing. You make decisions about my safety, and I don't get to participate in them." "I understand." "Stop telling me you understand," she said, not loudly. "Show me. Do it differently. Starting now." The silence held for a beat. "Danielle Mercer's office opens at 8:30, Si-hyeon said. "I want to go in person, not by phone. I'd like you to come with me so that you can speak to her as a client independent of my involvement." Imani looked at him. That was different. That was actually different. Not offering her his solution, but offering her independent access to a resource and letting her own the engagement. "Okay," she said. They were in the car by 8:15. The rain had eased to a gray drizzle, the kind Seattle produced as a baseline condition. Not weather exactly, more like atmosphere. Jeong drove, and Si-hyeon sat in the back with his phone, and Imani sat beside him with her eyes on the side mirror, watching the traffic pattern behind them. "We have a tail," she said. "Two," Si-hyeon said, without looking up from his phone. "The dark sedan from last night is 3 cars back. There's also a motorcycle, which is new." Imani looked at him. "You saw the motorcycle 40 seconds after we left the garage. And you were going to tell you now, yes." He looked up from the phone. "I was going to tell you now. I was calculating the route adjustment first." She looked at him for a moment, measuring the difference between his old habit and this version of it. "Okay," she said carefully. "What's the route adjustment?" "We don't go directly to Danielle's office. We go to Pike Place, first the main market, tourist area, lots of foot traffic, multiple exits. We leave the car with Jong and walk. Cameras everywhere in that area, which protects us. The sedan can't follow on foot without being visible, and the motorcycle loses its advantage in the crowd." He paused. "Then we cut through the market and take the stairs to the waterfront level and get a second car from there." Imani thought about it. And the drive? We're not retrieving it today? Not today. Not with 2 surveillance units active. He looked at her directly. I know that means leaving the evidence in the locker longer than you're comfortable with. It does. I'm not making that decision unilaterally, he said. I'm telling you my assessment and asking if you agree. Imani looked at him for another moment. The man sitting across from her she was aware of this in a way that was both complicated and inconvenient, the same man she had married. The same intelligence, the same stillness, the same quality of focused attention that had always made her feel, in the early years, like the most important thing in the room. He was also the man who had spent 4 years making decisions about her life from a comfortable distance and calling it love. Both of those things were true simultaneously. I agree, she said. For today. Tomorrow we get the drive. The market was loud and smelled of fish and coffee and wet produce and the particular close human warmth of a space that had been continuously occupied for over a century. Imani walked beside Si-hyeon through the main arcade, close but not touching, and she watched him navigate the culture with the specific skill of a man accustomed to moving through public spaces without being noticed. He was tall enough that she'd expected him to stand out, but he had a way of moderating his own presence, slightly dropped, pace matched to the crowd. Gazed forward rather than scanning. That made him functionally invisible in the flow of people. She filed that away. She had not seen him do it before, or she had not recognized it for what it was before. They took the stairs and came out on the waterfront level, and the second car was waiting, which meant Jong had made a call she hadn't seen Si-hyeon make, which meant there was a support infrastructure operating in the background that she did not have full visibility into. She stopped walking. How many people know where we are right now? She asked. Si-hyeon stopped beside her. Jong. The driver of the second car, whose name is Soo-min and who has worked for me for 8 years. No one else in my organization is aware of your involvement or your location. You're sure? No, he said, I'm not sure. In my world, certainty about who knows what is a thing you work toward and never fully achieve. He looked at her. But I've reduced the information footprint as much as I can. She took that in. It was, at minimum, an honest answer. Okay, she said. We keep moving. Danielle Mercer's office was in a building on 4th Avenue that smelled like carpet cleaner and legal ambition. Danielle herself was 51 years old, tall, dark-skinned, with natural locks pinned back from her face, and the specific quality of unimpressed attention that very good lawyers developed after years of listening to people explain their bad decisions. She had gone to law school with Imani's older sister. She and Imani were not close, but they had a history that was warm enough to matter. She looked at Si-hyeon when he walked in, and her expression did not change. Mr. Kwon, she said, I wasn't expecting you. He's here because the situation involves his organization, Imani said, but I'm your client. Independent of him. I need you to understand that from the beginning. Danielle looked at her, then looked at Si-hyeon again. Then back at Imani. Sit down, she said, both of you, and start from the beginning. They talked for 2 hours. By the end of the first hour, Danielle had asked Si-hyeon 11 direct questions about the trust structure and the Haedong Meridian Group and the specific nature of Imani's legal connection to it. And Si-hyeon had answered all 11 without deflecting, which Imani observed, and which was, she thought, either a genuine change or the most sophisticated performance she had ever watched him give. She could not yet tell which. She was leaning toward genuine because in 20 years of operating in his world, she had never seen him need to perform for an attorney he had chosen to bring into a situation. By the end of the second hour, Danielle had a legal pad covered in notes and an expression that had moved from unimpressed to something more like concerned engagement. The trust needs to be dissolved, she said. Imani's name needs to come off every document connected to Haedong Meridian Group with a clean legal record, showing it was removed voluntarily and not under duress. She looked at Si-hyeon. That process starts today. I draft the documentation, you execute it, and we file it through channels that create an unambiguous paper trail. She paused. And the drive. We retrieve it today, not tomorrow. We bring it here. I review it before it goes anywhere else. Imani looked at Si-hyeon. Today, he said, without hesitation. I'll adjust the route. I'll come with you. Danielle said. I want chain of custody established the moment that drive is in hand. Si-hyeon looked at the attorney with an expression Imani couldn't fully read, something between respect and recalibration. All right, he said. They were back in the second car and heading toward First Avenue at 11:43 in the morning when Si-hyeon's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something crossed his face, a brief, controlled tightening that he managed quickly, but not quickly enough. What is it? Imani said. He turned the phone toward her. It was a message, encrypted, routed through a contact relay she didn't recognize. The message was short. It read, the locker has been accessed. Ms. Caldwell should consider whether the remaining copies are worth the trouble they will cause her. Imani read it twice. The cold that moved through her was not fear exactly. It was the specific cold of realizing that the situation you have been managing had, while you were managing it, become significant, larger than you understood it to be. He got to the locker, she said. No, Si-hyeon said. His voice was level, but something underneath it was not level at all. Read it again. Accessed, not emptied, and remaining copies. He looked at her. Do-yeon believes there are multiple copies. He's telling us he found one. He's trying to find out if that's all there is. Imani stared at him. Is there more than one copy? He asked. She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Yes, she said. There's one more. Si-hyeon held her gaze. And then, quietly, with something in his voice she had not heard before, something that was not control or management, or the careful architecture of a man handling a situation, he said, Where? And Imani understood, in the way that certain moments made themselves immediately and permanently clear, that they had just passed the point where any version of caution could protect them from what was coming. The second copy was in Danielle's building. Not in Danielle's office specifically. Imani had not known, when she copied the files 3 weeks ago, that she would end up sitting across from Danielle Mercer in a 4th Avenue law office with a Korean ex-husband and a laundering investigation pressing in from all sides. She had not known any of that. What she had known was that a single copy of anything was the same as no copy at all. A sound that the first rule, and that the first important information was to separate it from yourself before someone decided that separating it from you was worth hurting you. She had left the second drive with the building's mail reception desk, addressed to herself, held for pickup. Anonymous, cheap, effective. 4th floor mail desk, she said. It's under my name. Si-hyeon looked at Soo-min in the front seat. Turn around. The car turned. Danielle was on the phone, had been on the phone for the last 90 seconds, speaking to someone at her office in a clipped shorthand that suggested she was rearranging her afternoon without explaining why. She ended the call, looked at the message on Si-hyeon's phone that Imani held toward her, and read it twice with the focused absence of expression that Imani recognized as the attorney's version of Si-hyeon's stillness. He's probing, Danielle said. Yes, Si-hyeon said. Which means he doesn't have everything. She handed the phone back. And he knows he doesn't. The message is designed to make you move, to make one of you go somewhere he's watching, to retrieve something he hasn't found. She looked at Imani directly. Where is it? We're going there now, Imani said. Does Do-yeon know about the second copy? He suspects it exists, Si-hyeon said. He can't know the location. Imani didn't tell anyone. You're certain, Danielle said to Imani. I'm certain, Imani said. I didn't tell anyone because there was no one to tell. I was handling this alone. Danielle absorbed that with a single nod. All right. When we get the drive, it comes directly to me. I review it before anyone else touches it, and we discuss next steps in my conference room, with the door closed. She looked at Si-hyeon with the specific measuring quality of a woman who had spent 20 years evaluating exactly which version of which person she was dealing with in any given room. You're paying my fees as of this morning? Yes, Si-hyeon said. Imani is my client. You are a secondary party whose cooperation I require and whose instructions I do not take. Is that clear? Completely, Si-hyeon said. Danielle looked at him for one more second, decided something, and looked back at the window. Drive faster, she said to no one in particular. The building's lobby was busy, mid-morning, foot traffic, a security desk with 2 guards who were more concerned with access badges than with the 3 people who walked in looking like they were late for a meeting. The male reception desk was on the 4th floor, staffed by a woman named Janet who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and who looked up at Imani with the mild professional recognition of someone who saw 1,000 faces a week and retained none of them. "I have a package held for pickup," Imani said. "Caldwell." Janet turned to her computer. Typed. "Caldwell." She stopped. Typed again. Frowned at the screen, with the specific frown. Someone who has found something where they expected nothing where they expected to find something. "I have a pickup note for that name," she said slowly, "but the package was already collected this morning." The lobby noise continued around them. Somewhere behind Imani, Danielle made a small sound that was not quite a word. "Collected," Imani said. "By whom?" the note said. Janet squinted at the screen. "It says it was collected by the addressee. Imani Caldwell, 9:52 this morning." Imani stared at her. 9:52. They had still been in Danielle's office at 9:52. Imani had not left the building between arriving at 8:30 and walking to this elevator 20 minutes ago. She had not collected anything. "Is there a signature?" Si-hyeon said behind her. His voice was very quiet. Janet looked at the screen. Yes, and a photo ID was shown, per protocol for... "Can I see the signature?" Imani said. Janet hesitated. This was technically outside normal procedure, and then looked at Imani's face and made a decision based on whatever she saw there. She turned the screen slightly. The signature was not Imani's. It was close, the same general proportion and initial letter shape, but it was not hers. And the ID that had been shown to Janet at 9:52 this morning had apparently been convincing enough that no one had questioned it. Imani turned away from the desk. She walked 3 steps toward the elevator bay and stopped with her back to the group, her hand pressed flat against the wall at shoulder height, and she stood like that for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. Her breathing was even. Her face, which nobody could see at the moment, was doing something she did not fully control, a tightening around the eyes, a compression of the mouth, the body's physical response to the specific feeling of having been outmaneuvered by someone who had been several steps ahead of her the entire time. Someone had known about the second drive. She had told no one. She had been alone when she made the copy. She had come to this building by herself at 9 in the morning 3 weeks ago, left the drive at this desk, and walked out without speaking to anyone she knew. She turned back. "Someone followed you," Si-hyeon said. He was watching her with that quality of complete attention that never felt like intrusion, because it was never casual. It was always specific, always directed at something real. 3 weeks ago, when you dropped it off. "I would have noticed," Imani said. "Not necessarily. If Do-yoon's people were already watching the shelter, and they knew you had copied the files, all they needed to do was follow you on the day you left. You wouldn't have been looking for surveillance at that point. You thought you were taking precaution, not that you were already being tracked." Imani looked at him. The logic was clean, and she hated it. "So both copies are gone." "Both copies are gone," Si-hyeon confirmed. Danielle's had said nothing during this exchange. She was standing with her legal pad tucked under one arm and her phone in her hand, and she was watching the two of them with the expression of someone rapidly revising her assessment of how serious the situation was. "The original records," she said, "at Harbor Haven. Are they still accessible?" "No," Si-hyeon said. "If Do-yoon has both copies and he's been watching the shelter's systems, he will have moved to clean the source records within the last 24 hours. Possibly sooner. Then what evidence do we have?" Danielle said. The silence that followed was the particular silence of people calculating the answer to a question and not liking the number they arrive at. "Imani's testimony," Si-hyeon said, "which without documentation is a woman who was arrested for theft describing financial irregularities she claims to have seen in records that no longer exist." He paused. "And whatever I can reconstruct from what I know about Do-yoon's network from my own monitoring over the past 4 years. Which is inadmissible in any form," Danielle said flatly. "Probably. So we have nothing," Imani said. "We have each other's accounts," Si-hyeon said. "And we have Do-yoon's behavior, the arrest, the planted watch, the phone call this morning, The collection of both drives by someone using a forged ID. That behavior is a pattern. Patterns can be documented and presented. By whom? Imani said. To whom? We walk into a prosecutor's office and say a man named Baek Do-yeon has been conducting financial fraud through charitable organizations. And by the way, we had proof, but he took it. She looked at him steadily. The only charge currently on file in this city is against me. A theft charge that makes me look like exactly the kind of unstable person who invents criminal conspiracies to explain why she stole a watch from a shelter. The words came out more raw than she intended. She had not meant to name that specific vulnerability. The way the situation had been constructed to make her look, and what that constructed appearance cost her in terms of credibility. But it was true, and they were past the point where leaving true things unsaid was useful. Danielle looked at her for a moment, with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite admiration, but occupied the same general territory. "Sit down," she said. "Not here, conference room. My office." We're going back upstairs, and we're going to think through this methodically, because there are always more options than the ones that are visible when you're standing in the middle of what just happened. They went back upstairs. The conference room was small and smelled like old wood and printer toner. Danielle put her legal pad on the table, took off her glasses, and cleaned them with the deliberate patience of a woman who used physical action to slow down her thinking when her thinking needed to slow down, and then looked at both of them across the table. "Tell me everything about the trust," she said to Si-hyeon. Everything. Not the summary. The structure, the documentation, the parties involved, the originating date, and every person who has had access to that documentation in any form. Si-hyeon began talking. He talked for 38 minutes. Imani sat across the table from him and listened to him describe, in precise and unflinching detail, the architecture of the Haedong Meridian Group's legal structure, the way the legitimate corporation had been built as a controlled separation from the criminal organization beneath it, trust mechanism designed to prevent any hostile faction from seizing the controlling authorization, and the secondary authorization point that bore her name. Imani had known the outline of this since 2 a.m. Hearing the specifics in daylight, in a legal office, while a corporate attorney took notes, with the dispassionate focus of someone who was not interested in judging, but only in mapping, was different. The specifics were more precise and more damaging than the outline. The specifics made clear that her name on that document was not a minor administrative artifact. It was a load-bearing element of the structure. Si-hyeon had not registered her as a symbolic secondary point. He had registered her as the actual failsafe, which meant Do-yeon did not just want the evidence she had copied. He wanted her cooperation, her actual legal authorization. Because without it, accessing what the trust protected was significantly more complicated. Danielle stopped writing at one point and looked up. "He needs her signature," she said. It was not a question. "Potentially," Si-hyeon said. "Not potentially," Danielle said. "If the trust structure is what you've just described, and if the assets it protects include what you've indicated, then there are specific transfer functions that require secondary authorization. Baek Do-yeon cannot access those functions with a forged ID and a stolen drive. He needs Imani's actual legal cooperation." She looked at Imani. "Which is why the arrest was designed the way it was. He wasn't just trying to retrieve the evidence. He was creating a situation that gave him leverage to ask for something larger." Imani sat very still. "He wants me to authorize something," she said. "He wants you afraid enough, or legally compromised enough, to cooperate," Danielle said. "The theft charge is a pressure mechanism. He doesn't expect it to result in a conviction. It's designed to give him something to hold over you. Pending charge, a compromised reputation, a woman who already looks like she has a complicated relationship with the truth." "And Si-hyeon in the picture," Imani said slowly. "He needed Si-hyeon involved because Si-hyeon's involvement makes you look further compromised," Danielle said. "A divorced woman arrested for theft who is suddenly being supported by her Korean organized crime ex-husband. The optics are designed to isolate you from credibility before you've had a chance to use it." The room was very quiet. Imani looked at the table surface for a moment. Then she looked at Si-hyeon. was watching her with the same focused attention as always, but underneath it, in the specific set of the muscles around his eyes and jaw, she could see something she had not seen clearly before. Not in 4 years of marriage, not in the 3 months since. The thing underneath the composure, he was frightened. Not of Do-yeon, not of the situation. He was frightened of what she was going to say next. Of what this and these facts and this particular morning were going to cost him in the only currency he had never been able to manage. "You knew," she said, "didn't you?" The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Expected," Si-hyeon said. "That's not the same thing as didn't know." "No," he said. "It's not." Danielle looked between them and made a precise professional decision to focus very intently on her legal pad. "When," Imani said, "when did you suspect that Do-yoon's target wasn't just information? That he needed the authorization?" 2 months ago, Si-hyeon said. "I received an indirect communication through a third party, a man who used to work in Do-yoon's network. He told me Do-yeon had been researching the trust structure. I didn't know at that point whether he understood the secondary authorization requirement. But you suspected, yes." Imani started again. "You didn't warn me. You didn't contact me. You didn't do anything except continue your monitoring from a distance and tell yourself that the distance was protection." The words were controlled and precise, and they hit like something physical. 2 months ago, Si-hyeon, while I was walking around this city with my name attached to your documents, you knew there was a man investigating those documents, and you said nothing. I was trying to manage the threat before it reached you. And how did that go? Her voice cracked on the last word. Not with grief. With something more like a controlled explosion, the sound of a person who has been holding a very large and very heavy thing for a very long time and has just been given one final piece of information that broke the grip. How did managing the threat from a distance go? I ended up in a holding cell with someone else's watch in my pocket, and no evidence left on 2 different drives, and my name on your papers, and no warning that any of it was coming. She stopped. Pressed both hands flat on the table. You had 2 months. I know, Si-hyeon said. Tell me why, she said. Not the strategic reason. The real one. Another silence. Danielle's pen had stopped moving. Because contacting you meant admitting what I'd done, Si-hyeon said. Trust. Your name on it without your knowledge. Telling you about Do-yeon meant telling you the full truth about the trust, and He stopped. I wasn't ready to have that conversation. Imani stared at him. She stared at him for a long time. You protected yourself, she said. Not me, you. He did not look away. Yes, he said quietly. That's what I did. The word sat in the room like something dropped from a great height. Danielle set her pen down very gently. She looked at Imani with the careful directness of a woman who knew the difference between a moment that needed legal expertise and a moment that needed something else entirely. And she said, Do you need a minute? No, Imani said. She breathed in, slowly through her nose and out through her mouth, and she reassembled herself with a visible physical effort, shoulders back, spine straight, hands no longer pressing against the table, but folded deliberately in front of her. No. We don't have a minute. Tell me what we do next. Danielle looked at her for one more moment, then picked up the pen. The trust dissolution is the immediate priority. Si-hyeon executes the paperwork today. I file it today. And your name is removed from Haedong Meridian Group's documentation through a process that is clean, legal, and creates a clear record showing you are no longer connected to any element of this structure. She looked at Si-hyeon. Once that's done, Do-yeon's leverage over Imani through the authorization requirement disappears. He still has the evidence she gathered, Si-hyeon said, which he cannot use without exposing himself, Danielle said. If he presents that evidence anywhere, if he tries to sell it, leverage it, or deploy it as pressure, he has to explain how he obtained it. A forged id, a woman's personal property collected by impersonation. That's not evidence. That's criminal exposure. She looked between them. The theft charge against Imani is our most immediate problem. We need to move, to have it dismissed, and we need to do it in a way that doesn't look like a wealthy man making his ex-wife's legal problems disappear. How, Imani said. The watch, Danielle said. It's the planted evidence. If we can establish a chain that shows The watch was not in your possession before the two men searched you if we can get security footage from inside Harbor Haven. From that evening, witness accounts from staff, anything that documents those men's presence and behavior. The charge unravels. Harbor Haven's board, Si-hyeon said. The legitimate board. They don't know what's been running through their financial infrastructure. If we approach them through proper channels, carefully, Danielle said. Because if Do-yoon has anyone on that board, approaching them carelessly tells him what we're doing before we've done it. Si-hyeon nodded. He had gone back into that operational mode. Imani recognized the part of him that processed tactical problems with the same clarity that other people processed arithmetic. She had once found that quality reassuring. She was finding it useful now, which was related but not the same thing. There's something else, Si-hyeon said. He was looking at the table with preparing to say the thing he has been not saying for the longest. The communication I received 2 months ago. The man who told me Do-yoon was investigating the trust structure. Danielle and Imani both looked at him. His name is Park Sung-jin. He ran logistics for the Vancouver Financial Group before Do-yoon left. He reached out to me as a courtesy old professional relationship, long history. He said he wanted me to know what Do-yoon was doing. Si-hyeon paused. I accepted the information. I thanked him. I did not question why he was offering it. Imani watched his face. And now you're questioning it. Now I'm wondering why a man with no current relationship with my organization, who worked for a group I have not been directly connected to in over 4 years, decided to contact me personally about Do-yoon's activities 2 months, before those activities produced a direct threat to someone connected to me. He looked up. Information offered without obvious motive is either goodwill or positioning. I assumed goodwill, and now Danielle said. I don't know, Si-hyeon said. But the fact that Do-yoon found both drives, that he knew about the second copy before Imani had told anyone it existed, including me, suggests that someone in a close orbit had information they shouldn't have had. The room absorbed this. Imani looked at Si-hyeon with a feeling she could not entirely name. It was not quite suspicion, not of him specifically. It was the feeling of a situation revealing itself to be larger and more complicated than its surface had suggested. The way a building looks manageable from outside, until you step through the door and find the interior is 3 times the size. You think Park Sung-jin is working with Do-yoon, she said. I think it's possible that Park Sung-jin told me about Do-yoon's interest in the trust specifically to start paying attention to the situation, Si-hyeon said. Which would mean Do-yoon wanted me watching. He wanted me engaged before the first move against Imani, so that when it happened, my response would be predictable. He was calibrating your reaction, Danielle said. He was staging it, Si-hyeon said. The arrest, the bail posting, the phone call to Imani this morning. He knew what I would do at each step, because he had spent months observing how I responded to information about the threat before it materialized. He paused. He wanted me here, in this city, engaged with this situation, making exactly the choices I have been making. Because the choices I've been making protecting Imani, involving an attorney, operating through legal channels. He stopped. Imani felt it before he finished the sentence, the shape of it. Those choices make you predictable, she said. Those choices make me transparent, Si-hyeon said. Do-yoon knows I'm trying to handle this legally because he anticipated that I would. He may be using the time our legal process requires to position something we haven't seen yet. Danielle stood up. Then we moved faster. She closed the legal pad with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Trust dissolution documentation. I need 2 hours. Si-hyeon, you signed today. Imani, I want you in this building, this floor, until those papers are filed. And I want the names of every person who might have had access to information about the secondary authorization point on that trust. Every person. Not the ones you're comfortable naming. All of them. Si-hyeon looked at her with something that was, Imani thought, approaching respect. All right, he said. And the Harbor Haven Board, Danielle continued. I have a nonprofit governance attorney who has done work with 2 of the board members. I can make a call this afternoon that doesn't look like it's connected to any of this. She looked at Imani. Your charge is my first priority. We get that dismissed before Do-yeon can use it as leverage for anything. And if he moves before we're ready, Imani said. Danielle looked at her. Then we deal with that when it happens. But right now we're not going to sit in a room and wait for a man to make the next move. She picked up her glasses. We're going to make him wait for us. Si-hyeon's phone buzzed on the table. All three of them looked at it. He picked it up. Read what was on the screen. His face did the thing Imani had learned to read in 4 years of watching him receive information he didn't like. Not a flinch, not a reaction. Just a microscopic tightening at the outer corners of his eyes that lasted less than a second before the composure reassembled. What is it? Imani said. Si-hyeon turned the phone. It was a photograph. Taken within the last hour, the timestamp in the metadata was 11:09 a. The image showed the exterior of a Capitol Hill apartment building. Imani recognized it because it was her building. The photograph was taken from street level and showed the entrance clearly. Standing at the entrance, speaking to someone inside through the intercom, was a man Imani did not recognize. But standing 20 feet behind him, watching, was Park Sung-jin. He sent you this, Danielle said. It was not a question. Yes, Si-hyeon said. Do-yeon sent you a photograph of his own associate outside Imani's apartment, Danielle said slowly. While we're sitting in this office. While he knows we're here. It's not a photograph of surveillance, Imani said. Cold was back. The specific cold of a situation becoming larger again, one more time. It's a message. He's telling you where he is. He's telling you what he could do. He wants a response, Si-hyeon said. He spent 3 days engineering a situation designed to provoke a specific response from me, and I have not given it to him. I've been operating through legal channels. He's escalating to force my hand. What response does he want? Danielle asked. Si-hyeon set the phone down. He sat back in his chair with the stillness of a man who has arrived at a decision point and is looking at it clearly, without the filters he would ordinarily apply, without the strategic framing, the cost-benefit architecture, careful management of how his choices appeared from the outside. Just the decision itself in its raw form. He wants me to be what I used to be, Si-hyeon said. He wants me to pick up a phone and send men to his location. He wants me to handle this the way the old version of me would have handled it, quietly, violently, outside any legal framework. Because if I do that, I prove that nothing has changed. I prove that the man trying to dismantle his criminal empire is still a criminal. And everything we've done in this office this morning becomes unusable. He looked at Imani. He's not just threatening you. He's threatening who I'm trying to become. Because if I revert, even once, he wins both problems simultaneously. The room was very quiet. Imani looked at Si-hyeon. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at 1 in the morning in a diner, and at 2 in the morning in his penthouse, and across 4 years of a marriage that had been built on a foundation that turned out to have rooms neither of them had fully mapped. She looked at him the way you looked at a person when you were deciding whether what you saw was real. Then don't revert, she said. There are people at your apartment, he said. I know that. Imani, I know that, she said again, more quietly. And I'm telling you not to revert. Because if you do, everything that comes after is built on the same foundation the last 4 years were built on. She held his eyes. Do-yeon wants you to be the man you used to be. So be the man you're trying to be instead. And let's figure out together what that man does next. Si-hyeon looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone and called Jong. Go to Miss Caldwell's building, he said. Don't approach the men outside. Park somewhere with visibility and call me with a description of anyone who enters or exits. A pause. No, nothing else. Just watch and call me. He put the phone down. Danielle was already writing. I'm calling the nonprofit governance contact now, she said. And I'm getting the trust dissolution papers drafted in the next 90 minutes. She did not look up. You two stay in this building until I tell you otherwise. Si-hyeon looked at Imani across the table. Imani looked back at him. They were sitting in a conference room on the 8th floor of a building in downtown Seattle, with no evidence, a pending theft charge, a man's associates outside her apartment, and a trust document that needed to be dissolved before any of it could move forward. They had no leverage, no documentation, No clear next step that didn't carry significant risk. What they had was a decision Si-hyeon had just made in front of a witness to not be who he used to be. A sound like green wood splitting, even when being who he used to be would have been faster and more certain, and would have removed the immediate threat with the kind of efficiency that his world had always rewarded. It was, Imani thought, the most important thing she had watched him do in the time she had known him. It was also, she was aware, nowhere near enough to fix the situation they were in. Danielle's phone call connected in the quiet of the conference room, and the attorney's voice shifted to the smooth professional register she had used when she was speaking to someone she needed something from. And Si-hyeon's phone buzzed once more on the table with a message from Jong that said simply, 2 men. Still outside. Third one arrived 2 minutes ago. Imani read the message. Set the phone back down, folded her hands on the table, and understood that whatever happened next, she was no longer standing on the edge of the situation. She was in the middle of it, with no clean way out, and the only people she had were a lawyer she hadn't spoken to in 3 years, and the man she had divorced, because he couldn't stop protecting her from things she deserved to know. The trust dissolution papers took 94 minutes. Danielle worked through them with the focused velocity of someone who understood that every minute the document remained unsigned was a minute that Imani Caldwell's name stayed attached to something that could be used to destroy her. She drafted, reviewed, flagged 2 structural issues that required adjustment, fixed them herself, and had the final version printed and on the conference table at 1:47 in the afternoon. Si-hyeon signed without reading them. Danielle stopped him. Read them. I trust your work. I didn't ask if you trusted my work. I asked you to read them. Because if this document is ever challenged, the worst possible outcome is a signature from a man who can't describe what he signed. She held his gaze with the flat professional authority of someone who had stopped being impressed by powerful men sometime in her mid-30s. Read them. Si-hyeon read them. It took 11 minutes. He read every line with the same methodical attention he applied to everything. Not performatively, not to satisfy Danielle. A sound like green wood splitting, but because she was right and he knew she was right. And somewhere in the last 18 hours, he had started making a practice of acting on things he knew, instead of on things that were strategically convenient. He signed at 4 separate points, initialed 3 paragraphs, dated everything in the precise way Danielle indicated. Imani watched him do it from across the table. She watched him sign away the structure he had spent years building. Not the criminal organization, not yet, but the legal architecture that had made his name the center of everything. The trust that had quietly, without her knowledge, made her name the center of it too. She watched him reduce that architecture to dissolved paper, with a pen and a date and his own signature, and she felt something shift in the room that was not quite resolution, and not quite relief, but was in the same general direction as both. Danielle filed electronically from her office computer at 2:11. She printed the confirmation, stamped it, and put it in a folder that she handed to Imani, not to Si-hyeon, to Imani without commentary. You're no longer legally connected to Haedong Meridian Group in any form, she said. That connection no longer exists, which means Do-yoon's leverage through the authorization requirement is gone. She sat back. Now we deal with the theft charge and the Harbor Haven situation. My contact on the board, Si-hyeon said. His phone was in his hand and had been for 20 minutes, receiving periodic updates from Jong that he had been relaying to Danielle and Imani in real time. The 3 men outside Imani's Capitol Hill building had been joined by a 4th, and a car matching the description of the previous night's sedan had parked on the block. Nobody had entered. Nobody had left. They were waiting. The board contact, Si-hyeon continued. I've been considering whether to use it. And Danielle said, it's a risk. If anyone on the board is connected to Do-yoon, even peripherally using that contact tells him we're moving toward Harbor Haven's governance structure. It may prompt him to move faster than we're ready for. Or Danielle said, it gives the board the information they need to cooperate with whatever investigation follows, which strengthens the case significantly more than anything else we currently have. Imani had been quiet for several minutes. She was looking at the confirmation folder in her hands. The clean proof that her name was no longer on someone else's legal structure, and she was thinking about something that had been sitting at the edge of her attention since the conference room conversation had turned to Park Sung-jin. The communication, she said. Both Danielle and Si-hyeon looked at her. 2 months ago, Park Sung-jin reached out to warn you about Do-yeon. She looked at Si-hyeon. Did he contact you by phone, email? How? Encrypted messaging platform, Si-hyeon said. The kind that doesn't retain metadata. But you have the conversation. I have my copy of it. The platform deletes from both ends after 48 hours unless one party saves the exchange. Did you save it? A pause.
Yes.
Why? Because in my world, you save everything. Information has a way of becoming relevant again. Imani set the folder on the table. Then that conversation is documentation. It establishes that someone in Do-yeon's orbit was making contact with you, specifically about the trust structure, 2 months before the Harbor Haven situation emerged. That's not proof of Do-yeon's operation, but it's the beginning of a pattern. She looked at Danielle. Isn't it? Danielle had already picked up her pen. If Park Sung-jin can be established as an associate of Do-yeon through business records, financial connections, any verifiable link, then that communication becomes evidence of a coordinated effort to manipulate Si-yeon's response to a planned operation. She looked at Si-yeon. That conversation needs to be in my hands today. I'll send it. Not send, I want the original platform export. Unmodified. Whatever format it saves in. She looked at him with the clean professional directness that Imani was developing a considerable amount of respect for. Because a forwarded message looks like a forwarded message. An original export looks like documentation. Si-hyeon looked at his phone. It will take me 30 minutes to access the archive and export the file properly. You have 20, Jong called at minute 11. Si-yeon looked at the screen and answered immediately. Call lasted 40 seconds. Imani watched his face during those 40 seconds and read the jaw, read the eyes, read the almost imperceptible change in his breathing pattern that meant the information coming through the phone was not the information he had been preparing for. He ended the call. The men left Imani's building, he said. Danielle looked up from her notes. All 4 of them, Si-yeon said. Car pulled away 6 minutes ago. Jong followed at distance. They're heading south toward Sodo. Toward Harbor Haven, Imani said. Toward the shelter, Si-hyeon confirmed. His voice was controlled, but underneath it something had shifted, a frequency she recognized. Not fear, urgency. The specific urgency of a man who has just recognized that the timeline he had been working from was wrong. He's not waiting for us to move toward the board. He's moving first. If he gets to Harbor Haven's records before we've established contact with the legitimate board members, he can't destroy what's already been filed with governing bodies, Danielle said sharply. A nonprofit's public filings are... He's not going after the filings, Si-yeon said. He's going after the people. The board members who don't know what's been running through their organization. If he reaches them first, if his people walk into those conversations before we do, he controls the narrative. He stood up. He tells them there's an investigation coming, that someone is trying to implicate Harbor Haven in financial fraud, that the safest thing they can do is have their attorneys assert privilege and say nothing. And suddenly the people who are most valuable to any legitimate investigation become the most defended against it. Danielle stared at him for a fraction of a second. Then she picked up her phone and stood up simultaneously. I'm calling my contact now. Right now, she was already moving toward the door. You two stay in this room. She was gone before Si-hyeon could respond. He sat back down. The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms where the people in them are processing information at speed and not yet ready to speak. Imani could hear Danielle's voice in the outer office controlled, professional, moving fast. She could hear her own breathing. She could hear the small sound of Si-hyeon's thumb moving across his phone screen as he worked on the platform archive. She's good, Si-hyeon said without looking up. Yes. You should have introduced me to her during the marriage. Imani looked at him. I didn't introduce you to any of my friends during the marriage. I know, because I was protecting them from your world the same way you were protecting me from it. She said it without heat. Just as a fact. We were both doing it. maintaining these separate spheres and telling ourselves it was consideration. Si-hyeon looked up from the phone. He looked at her with the full attention, no filters, no management. Yes, he said, we were. That she stopped. We can talk about that later. Focus on the archive. He focused on the archive. Danielle came back at minute 18. Her expression had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the way professional expressions changed when the situation had shifted, and the shift was significant. I reached my contact, she said. He's a member of Harbor Haven's governance committee. He had no knowledge of any irregular financial activity. She paused with the careful precision of someone choosing her words for maximum accuracy, deeply disturbed. He's calling an emergency board session for this evening. 6 o'clock. She looked at Imani. He wants to speak to you directly. As the person who found the records. I don't have the records anymore, Imani said. You have your testimony. And your testimony, delivered in person to the board's own governance committee, is significantly more powerful than a drive full of data that may or may not survive legal challenge. Danielle sat down. He also told me something else. Harbor Haven received a call 20 minutes ago from an attorney representing a group of donors asking for an immediate meeting with the executive director. The attorney's name is one I don't recognize. The donors he's claiming to represent don't match any of the shelter's known major contributors. Dooyeon's people, Si-hyeon said. Almost certainly, Danielle said. Which means he's already moving on the board through a different channel. He's sending a lawyer we don't recognize to create confusion and delay while his people work on the board members directly. She looked at Si-hyeon. How many men does he have available in this city? I don't know precisely, Si-hyeon said. Enough to watch multiple locations simultaneously, which we've already seen. Enough to have a forged ID processed quickly and a lawyer on retainer. He paused. More than I expected him to have mobilized this quickly. Then we don't have 6 o'clock, Danielle said. We need to be at Harbor Haven before the lawyer gets in the door. That's in 40 minutes, Imani said. Yes. Danielle was already standing again, already reaching for her coat. Archive, do you have it? Si-hyeon held up his phone. Just finished. Send it to my secure email. Right now. She gave him the address from memory without checking anything. He sent it in 30 seconds. Her phone chimed in her coat pocket confirming receipt. Good. Let's move. They went down in the elevator with Danielle between them, which felt more like the attorney's instinct for keeping opposing parties separated than a conscious arrangement. And Sumin had the car outside the building's main entrance before they reached the lobby, which meant Si-hyeon had made a call Imani had not seen him make, which she noticed and decided to address at a moment when it was not actively irrelevant. The drive to Sodo took 14 minutes. The city was doing its afternoon thing traffic, moving in the contradictory patterns of a place that had grown faster than its infrastructure, and Sumin navigated it with the quiet competence of someone who had memorized the city's arterial bypasses and used them without drama. Danielle was on her phone for 11 of the 14 minutes. By the time they arrived at Harbor Haven's block, she had spoken to 2 people Imani did not know and sent 3 messages that she did not explain, and her expression had the compressed focus of someone running 3 simultaneous operations in their head and keeping them separate. Jeong's car was parked on the cross street, visible from the shelter's entrance. Si-hyeon caught his driver's eye as they came around the corner, and Jeong lifted 2 fingers briefly from the steering wheel, a signal Imani interpreted as clear. 2 minutes, though she did not ask. She had to say that a certain amount of Si-hyeon's operational communication was going to happen in a language she did not speak, and that demanding full transparency on every hand signal in a moment of active pressure was a fight she did not have time to have. She would have it later. The shelter's entrance was a reinforced door set into a converted industrial building with a small plaque beside the buzzer that said Harbor Haven Support Services. Ring for entry. Danielle rang. A woman's voice answered through the intercom, cautious and professional, and Danielle gave her name and her contact's name on the board. And after a brief wait, the door opened. They were inside. The shelter was functional and carefully maintained in the way of organizations that operated on constrained resources and understood that their physical environment communicated something to the people who used it. Clean floors, muted colors, comfortable furniture in the common areas. Staff moving through the hallways with the specific purposeful quiet of people trained to make their presence reassuring rather than intrusive. Imani had worked here on Saturday mornings, and she had liked it, had liked the particular kind of work it represented, the small practical things that added up to something significant for women who had arrived with very little. The fact that someone had been running money through this place made something cold and specific happen in her chest that was not quite rage, but occupied the same territory. A man met them in the hallway near the front office. He was perhaps 65, with the build of someone who had once been physically imposing, and whose body still remembered it, and the expression of someone who had received profoundly unwelcome information in the last 20 minutes, and was managing it with the effortful composure of a person who believed in composure as a value. "Thomas Reeves," he said to Danielle. "We spoke on the phone." "Danielle Mercer. This is Imani Caldwell." Reeves looked at Imani with the specific quality of attention people gave to the source of a problem they had not yet decided whether to trust. "You found the financial irregularities," he said. "Yes," Imani Fain said. "When?" 3 weeks ago, I was helping Marcia with the database migration." Something moved across his face at the mention of Marcia's name. "Marcia doesn't know about this. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. I was trying to understand what I had before I said anything. And now the records are gone," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Si-hyeon, who had positioned himself slightly behind Imani and to her right, not protectively, she thought, or at least not only protectively, practically, creating space for her to be the person in the room who mattered to this conversation. "Who are you?" Reeves asked him. "Someone trying to make sure Miss Caldwell's account reaches the people who can use it," Si-hyeon said. Reeves's jaw shifted slightly. He was not satisfied with that answer, but he was intelligent enough to recognize that the conversation he needed to have was not with Si-hyeon. He looked back at Imani. "There's an attorney downstairs," he said. "He arrived 15 minutes ago. He's claiming to represent a group of donors who want to discuss Harbor Haven's financial governance before the board session tonight." "Don't meet with him," Danielle said. Reeves looked at her. "Have your own attorney tell him. The board is in session and unavailable until further notice. Do not let him speak to any board member, any staff member, or the executive director. Do not let him access any records, digital or physical." Danielle's voice was measured and absolute. "He is not representing donors. He is representing a man who has been using your organization's donation infrastructure to launder money. And his purpose in being here is to control what you know, and when you know it before a legitimate investigation can establish the full picture." The hallway was very quiet. Reeves looked at Danielle for a long moment. His jaw was set, and his shoulders were tight, and he had the expression of a man confronting the possibility that the institution he had worked to protect had been compromised from inside in a way he had not detected. It was the specific expression of someone whose trust had been used against them, and Imani recognized it, because she had been wearing a version of it for the last 18 hours. "Show him out," he said quietly. He wasn't talking to any of them. He turned to a staff member who had appeared in the hallway, said something in a low voice, and the staff member disappeared. Then Reeves looked at Imani. "Tell me everything you found." They went into the small conference room, adjacent to the main office. Reeves, Danielle, Imani, and Si-hyeon, and a young woman who turned out to be Reeves's executive assistant, and who took notes in a legal assistant with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that what she was writing mattered. Imani talked for 26 minutes. She described every detail she could remember from the financial records, the shell company names, the transfer patterns, the volume, the routing structure. She had no documentation, but she had memory, and memory trained on financial data moved differently than ordinary recollection. She had spent 2 years as a financial compliance consultant before her career shifted, and the skill of reading a transaction record and holding its structure was not one that disappeared. She reconstructed Blitten. She reconstructed what she had seen with the precision of someone who had been reviewing it in her mind for 3 weeks and knew it was going to matter. Reeves listened without interrupting. His expression moved through several distinct phases: disbelief, recognition, anger, the specific controlled fury of someone who cares deeply about something and has just learned it was violated. And he emerged at the end of Imani's account with his hands flat on the table and his eyes somewhere between, focused, and somewhere he wasn't letting anyone see. "I want to know who had access to the donation database," he said. "Not historical access. Current access. Who can log in right now?" The executive assistant was already on her phone. "4 people," she said after 40 seconds. Marcia, the executive director, the board treasurer, and an external accounting consultant who was brought in 8 months ago to help with the new software implementation. The consultant, Reeves said. "A firm called Meridian Pacific Consulting," the assistant said. "They were recommended by," she checked her notes. "They were recommended through a referral from one of our donors. I'd have to check the file for the specific donor." Meridian Pacific. Imani looked at Si-hyeon. He was very still. "Haedong Meridian," she said quietly. "Not directly," Si-hyeon said, just as quietly. "But the naming pattern?" He stopped, looked at Reeves. "The consulting firm. Do you have a principal contact name?" The assistant checked. "A man named Park Sung-jin." The room did something that rooms did when information landed in them that changed the shape of everything. Not a physical change, not a sound, but a collective adjustment in how every person in it was breathing. Park Sung-jin, the man who had warned Si-hyeon about Do-yeon 2 months ago. The man whose warning had felt like courtesy and had been, Si-hyeon had suspected, positioning. He had been inside Harbor Haven for 8 months, not as surveillance, as infrastructure. He had been the one who built the channel Do-yeon used. He had embedded himself in the shelter's systems under a consulting arrangement that gave him database access and the kind of quiet institutional familiarity that made him invisible. And 2 months ago, he had called Si-hyeon to warn him to start the clock, to begin calibrating Si-hyeon's response, because the operation was almost ready to move, and they needed Si-hyeon watching, engaged, predictable. "He built the access point," Si-hyeon said. His voice was completely level and completely cold. "Park Sung-jin set up the channel 8 months ago. Do-yeon used it for at least 6 months of active transfers before Imani found the records. Park's warning to me 2 months ago was to begin the final phase, to bring me into motion before they made their move on Imani. Because they needed to know how you'd respond," Danielle said. "Because the operation needed to complete. They needed the authorization transfer, Imani's signature, and they needed it to look voluntary. They spent months constructing a situation that would make Imani cooperative." He looked at Imani. "The arrest was the final pressure mechanism, the framing, the watch. Everything designed to make you frightened enough and legally compromised enough to want a way out." Imani looked at him. Her breathing was even. Her hands were flat on the table. "They underestimated how much she hated owing anyone a way out," she said. Something moved through Si-hyeon's expression that was not the moment to examine. Reeves looked between them. "I need to make a call," he said, to the board treasurer. "He needs to know about this before 6 o'clock, and he needs to know it from me, not from whoever is waiting downstairs." He stood. "I'm going to assume that what I heard in this room is the beginning of something larger that my board needs to cooperate with fully. I'm also going to assume that Harbor Haven's clients, the women currently in the shelter, not in danger from whatever is happening." "Not from Do-yeon's operation," Si-hyeon said. "He has no interest in them." "No," Reeves said. "What he had interest in was our good name." His voice, for the first time, had an edge that was not controlled. 8 months of using this organization's reputation as cover. He picked up his phone. "I'll need everything you can give me. Every name, every account, every transaction pattern Imani can reconstruct. Tonight, my attorney will be present. So will mine," Danielle said. Reeves nodded once and left the room. The executive assistant followed him. The door closed. Danielle looked at Si-hyeon. "The Park Sung-jin communication you archived. I'm forwarding it to a contact at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network tonight, along with everything Imani just described. The account structure she outlined is recognizable to anyone who knows what layered charitable laundering looks like, and the consulting firm connection gives them a verifiable entry point." She looked at Imani. This is going to move fast once it starts. You need to be prepared for a period where you are very visible and very scrutinized. I can handle scrutiny, Imani said. I know you can. I'm telling you because the charge against you, the theft charge, it's going to be the first thing any opposing attorney tries to use. She paused. But it's also going to be the first thing that falls apart when the full picture emerges. A woman who found evidence of financial fraud and was subsequently framed for theft by the people she had evidence against. That narrative is very clear. As long as we can establish the sequence, Imani said. We can, Danielle said. Between the security footage request from Harbor Haven Systems, the forged ID at the fourth-floor mail desk, the phone call to Imani this morning, and the Park Sung-jin communication, the sequence documents itself. She stood. I need to make 3 calls. Give me 20 minutes. She left. The room was quiet again. The two of them, Imani and Si-hyeon, sat at a conference table in a shelter in Sodo with the afternoon light coming through a narrow window in the specific gray-gold quality that Seattle produced when the cloud cover thinned slightly, without committing to being anything other than clouds. Si-hyeon's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted. What? Imani said. He turned the phone toward her. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. No name attached. The message read, "You made your choice, Kwon. We'll respect it. But the woman should understand that the authorization window closes at midnight tonight. After that, the trust restructuring we filed in Seoul becomes the controlling document, and what she knows or signed today is irrelevant. She has until midnight to reconsider. This offer doesn't come a third time." Imani read it. She read it twice. "There's a filing in Seoul," she said. "If there is," Si-hyeon said, his voice careful and controlled in the way of someone checking the walls of something before deciding how alarmed to be, "it would be a fraudulent document. A forged trust restructuring filed with Korean corporate regulators using documents that predate today's dissolution." He paused. "It would require significant institutional access to file convincingly. But it could be done. If Park Sung-jin had access to the original trust documentation, which he may have, given his position inside the Meridian consulting structure, it is possible he retained enough documentation to construct a filing that appears legitimate." Si-hyeon set the phone face down on the table. "It would not hold under scrutiny, but it doesn't need to hold under scrutiny tonight. It only needs to create confusion, to make investors, board members, and regulatory contacts uncertain about which version of the Haedong Meridian structure is the valid one. Which delays everything," Imani said. "Every investigation, every board cooperation, every step forward we've taken today." "Yes, until after midnight. Yes." "What happens at midnight?" she said. Si-hyeon was quiet for a moment. "I'm not certain. But the fact that he's given a specific deadline means there's a specific action he's attempting to complete before that point. Something that becomes significantly harder to complete after midnight, after Danielle's filings are on record, after the Harbor Haven Board has been informed, after the FinCEN contact receives her communication. So he's trying to run out the clock," Imani said. "Complete the operation before the legitimate legal process catches up to it." "Yes. And the message is a last attempt to make me believe I can stop that by cooperating." "Yes." She looked at him. "What does he actually need? Not the authorization. That's gone now. You dissolved the trust. What else?" Si-hyeon picked up his phone again. He was thinking she could see it in the way his eyes moved without focusing on anything in the room. "The authorization to release controlled assets under the old trust structure," he said slowly. "That authorization is now void. But if his sole filing exists, if it was time-stamped before today's dissolution, a corrupt regulatory contact could argue that the dissolution was preempted by the prior filing." He stopped. "He needs a confirmation from Imani that the secondary authorization point is valid under the old structure. Something documented, an email, a signed statement, anything that places her name on a document supporting the old trust after the point where he claims it was restructured. He wants me to create evidence," Imani said. "He wants you to create the appearance of ambiguity. One document from you expressing any form of recognition of the old structure's validity would be enough to delay everything by weeks while competing regulatory claims are sorted." Imani sat with that for a moment. The specific cold quality of understanding exactly what she was being asked to do and exactly why she wasn't going to do it. Forward the message to Danielle, she said. Si-hyeon forwarded it without hesitation. 3 seconds later, his phone buzzed with Danielle's response, already on it. Stay where you are. They stayed where they were. The afternoon moved. Outside the narrow window, Seattle continued its afternoon operations traffic, rain returning to a steady presence, the sounds of a port city going about its business in the way that port cities did regardless of whatever human drama was occurring at any specific interior point within them. At 4:27, Danielle came back. Her expression was the most openly readable it had been since they first walked into her office that morning, which meant the news was either very good or very bad, because Danielle Mercer's composure held through everything in between. The Seoul filing, she said. It exists. Was filed 3 days ago. Si-hyeon's jaw tightened. However, Danielle continued, it was filed by a shell company that the Korean Corporate Registrar's Office is not authorized to represent. My contact at a Seoul law firm identified the issue within 40 minutes of my call. The filing entity doesn't have standing to submit trust restructuring documents on behalf of a Korean family trust without a specific power of attorney from the trust's primary holder. She looked at Si-hyeon. They don't have. The filing is invalid, Si-hyeon said. The filing is invalid and will be flagged for investigation by Korean regulators within the next 12 hours. My sole contact is filing the challenge tonight. She sat. The midnight deadline in that message is fabricated pressure. There is no operative window. Do-yeon needed Imani to believe the deadline was real, so she would act before she had time to verify. She looked at Imani. He was betting on panic. He's been betting on panic since the beginning, Imani said. Yes. Danielle put her legal pad on the table, and at every point you didn't panic, which is why we're ahead of him. Imani looked at the table. She was tired. The tiredness was specific and physical. The kind that came from 18 consecutive hours of moving through a situation that required every available cognitive resource without break. Her eyes felt thick. Her lower back ached from conference room chairs. She was running on coffee and the particular adrenaline that came from a situation that had not yet resolved. The board session is at 6, she said. Yes, Danielle said. And I need you coherent for it. There's a bathroom down the hall. Go splash water on your face. Eat something. Reeves's assistant left sandwiches in the outer office. 15 minutes. Then we prepare what you're going to say to the board. Imani stood up. Si-hyeon stood with her. She looked at him. He sat back down. In the bathroom down the hall, Imani ran cold water over her wrists and her face and looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink. She looked like what she was, Sumyeon, who had been awake for the better part of 20 hours in a situation she had not chosen, dealing with a problem she had discovered by accident, while trying to do something useful on a Saturday morning. Her eyes were clear despite everything. Her jaw was set in the way it had been setting itself since approximately 2 in the morning when she realized this situation was significantly larger than she had initially understood it to be. She thought about the trust document, dissolved now, her name removed. She thought about a storage locker on First Avenue, where a drive used to be. A Soundern-Sefton. She thought about a man named Park Sung-jin who had spent 8 months in Sizemore and Zelting while the women it served trusted it with the most vulnerable period of their lives. She thought about Si-hyeon, sitting in the conference room with his phone and his operational mind, and the specific look on his face when Reeves's assistant said Park Sung-jin's name, the look of a man absorbing a failure of his own judgment, with the full weight of what that failure had cost. She dried her face, went back out. In the outer office. She ate half a sandwich, standing at the counter and looked out the window. The street below Jeanswa's car was still parked on the cross street, and 3 other cars she did not recognize were positioned at intervals that were not entirely random. She registered this and ate the other half of the sandwich. The board session started at 6:03. 11 people in a room that was too small for 11 people, plus 3 attorneys and Imani and Si-hyeon, who was present at Reeves's specific request because the board wanted to understand the Haidong Meridian connection in its full context. The room smelled like people and anxiety and the specific institutional smell of a building that had been functioning under pressure for its entire existence. Imani spoke for 40 minutes. She was precise and organized, and she did not soften anything. She described what she had found, and when she had found it, and what had happened afterward, including her arrest, including the planted watch, including the forged ID and the phone call and the midnight deadline. She described Park Sung-jin's role as the consulting firm principal who had built the access point. She described Do-yoon's name from the original financial documentation. The board listened. Several board members asked questions. One asked twice whether Imani was certain about what she had seen in the records, and Imani said yes, and described 3 specific account numbers from memory that she had memorized the week she found the records because she had understood, even then, that documentation alone was fragile. The board member wrote them down. At 7:41, the board voted unanimously to cooperate with any regulatory investigation, to suspend the external consulting firm's access immediately, and to engage their own forensic accounting firm to reconstruct the financial activity from whatever records remained in their systems. 7:53, Danielle's FinCEN contact confirmed receipt of her submission. At 8:17, a message arrived on Si-hyeon's phone from a number that had not appeared before. He read it. He sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he stood up from his chair in the corner of the boardroom and crossed to Danielle and showed her the screen. Danielle read it. Her expression did not change, but her breathing pattern shifted slightly, which Imani had learned over the course of the day was Danielle's equivalent of a significant reaction. Imani crossed the room. The message read, "You want to play it this way, Kwon? Clean hands, attorneys, regulators. Fine. But consider what happens when the people investigating your legitimate business find the 18 months of activity you haven't disclosed yet. The parts of the Meridian transition you didn't put in front of Danielle Mercer this morning. We both know those exist. You have until tomorrow morning to reconsider the scope of your cooperation." Imani read it twice. She looked at Si-hyeon. His face was completely still. The jaw, the eyes, the particular quality of composure that she had spent 4 years learning to read, all of it present, all of it operational. But underneath it, she saw what she had seen in Danielle's conference room when she had told him he had protected himself instead of her. She saw a man looking at a consequence he had tried to outrun, and finding it had been running beside him the entire time. "What 18 months?" she said quietly. Si-hyeon looked at her. His expression did not shift. His eyes did not move away from hers. And he said, with the specific quality of a man who has decided, in the space of 4 seconds, that one more omission will cost more than anything the truth can take from him. "Sit down," he said. "I need to tell you something." The room emptied in the way. Rooms emptied after long institutional meetings, people gathering papers, exchanging quiet words, moving toward the door with the specific physical relief of people who had been sitting in chairs under pressure for nearly 2 hours and were ready to stop. Reeves stayed. Danielle stayed. The board treasurer, a compact man named Gerald, who had asked the most precise questions during Imani's account, stayed because Danielle had asked him to. Si-hyeon looked at all of them. Then he looked at Imani. "I need the room," he said to Danielle. Not a request. Not quite a command. The tone of a man who understood he was asking for something he did not entirely have the right to ask for. Danielle looked at Imani. Imani nodded once. Danielle guided Reeves and Gerald out with the smooth professional authority she had been exercising all day, and the door closed, and the room was just the two of them, and the fluorescent quiet, and the lingering smell of too many people in a small space. Imani sat. Si-hyeon remained standing for a moment, not from formality, she thought, but because sitting felt like a diminishment of something he was not ready to diminish yet. Then he sat too. He put his phone face down on the table, and he looked at his hands for a moment, and then he looked at her. 18 months ago, he said, I began the formal process of separating the criminal infrastructure from Haidong Meridian Group. I have described this to you in general terms. What I have not described is the transition period, the 18 months between initiating that process and the point where the separation became legally and financially clean. Imani watched him. During that period, Si-hyeon continued. Certain assets that were nominally criminal in origin were moved through the legitimate corporate structure. Not laundered, the distinction matters, though I understand it may not feel like it does right now. Moved, with the intention of restructuring their legal status before the transition completed. He paused. Some of those movements created a paper record that, viewed without context, resembles the activity of a man using his legitimate corporation to conceal illegally obtained money. Does it resemble that, Imani said, or is that what it is? The question landed clean and direct, and Si-hyeon did not flinch from it. The intent was legal restructuring, he said. The method, during the transition period, was not always clean. There were decisions I made to accelerate the process that created exposure I intended to manage before it became relevant. He looked at her steadily. It became relevant tonight. Imani sat with that. She sat with it the way she had been sitting with things all day, not running from the weight of them, not immediately converting them into action, but holding them and letting them be exactly what they were, before deciding what they required from her. Do-yeon knows about this, she said. He has documentation. Which means Park Sung-jin had access to internal Haedong records that I did not know he had. Deeper access than I understood the consulting arrangement provided. Si-hyeon's jaw moved slightly. I underestimated the depth of the penetration. I assumed Park was tracking the trust structure. He was tracking the full transition process. For how long? Possibly the entire 8 months he was embedded here. Possibly longer, if he had access to earlier records through other channels. So Do-yeon has documentation of 18 months of financial activity that looks, without context, like criminal money movement through your legitimate company, Imani said. A sound like green wood splitting, and he's threatening to surface that documentation Haedong Meridian Group if you don't pull back from cooperating with the Harbor Haven investigation. Yes. What happens if that documentation surfaces? Si-hyeon was quiet for 2 seconds. A protracted investigation, during which the legitimacy of the entire Haedong transition process would be in question. It would not necessarily result in criminal charges. The intent and the legal framework of the restructuring are defensible, but it would take time. Months, possibly longer, and during that period, every cooperative step we've taken today becomes entangled in competing legal processes. And Do-yeon gets that time to finish what he started, Imani said. Yes. So the threat is real. The threat is real, Si-hyeon confirmed. Imani looked at him across the table. The fluorescent light was doing what fluorescent light always did, flattening everything, removing shadow, making people look slightly more tired and slightly more exposed than they wanted to be. Si-hyeon looked tired. He looked, she thought, a sound like green wood splitting, like a man who had been carrying a very specific kind of weight for a very long time and had just been informed that the weight was heavier than he had told anyone it was, including himself. You were going to tell Danielle, Imani said. Before you told me. Pause. I was going to tell both of you simultaneously. That's not an answer. I was going to tell Danielle first, he said. Because I needed to understand the legal exposure before I could explain it to you accurately. Imani nodded. Slowly, she filed that. Not with anger, she was too tired for productive anger, but with the specific attention she gave to things that were still true even when the surrounding situation had changed. Tell me the full scope, she said, not the legally defensible version. The full scope, Si-hyeon told her. It took 22 minutes. He described the transition process. From the beginning, the original criminal infrastructure, the decision to dismantle it, the construction of the legal separation framework, and the 18 months during which assets of compromised origin had moved through Haedong channels in ways that were documented, recorded, and not entirely clean. He named the amounts. He named the methods. He described 2 specific decisions he had made during that period that he knew, at the time he made them, carried risk he had chosen to accept because the alternative was a slower process that created different exposures. He did not soften any of it. When he finished, the room was quiet. Imani looked at the table surface. She had the feeling familiar by now. She had experienced it at least 4 times in the last 20 hours of a situation revealing another layer beneath the layer she thought she had reached. Like pulling back a floor to find another floor underneath. You've known this exposure existed for 18 months, she said. Yes. And you were managing it? Yes. By yourself? Yes. She looked up at him. Is there anything else? Si-hyeon looked back at her. His eyes were steady and tired and completely undefended. No, he said, that is everything. She held his gaze for a long moment. Long enough that the quality of the silence changed from the silence of information being processed to the silence of a decision being made somewhere below the level of conscious thought. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, not understanding it yet. We tell Danielle all of it. Tonight. She pushed her chair back. And then we let her decide what the legal strategy looks like, because that is her job, and she is significantly better at it than either of us. She stood. Do-yeon wants you to pull back. He wants you to decide that the exposure is too large, and the fight is too costly, and the safest thing is to step away and let him complete his operation quietly. She looked at Si-hyeon directly. He's wrong about you. He's been wrong about you this whole time. He built a strategy around the man you used to be, and you haven't been that man for 18 months, and he missed it. She picked up her folder, the trust dissolution confirmation that Danielle had handed specifically to her from where she had set it on the table at the beginning of this conversation. Let's go. Si-hyeon stood. He stood and he looked at her, and something across his face that was not gratitude exactly, not relief, not the complicated emotional transaction that the word love described poorly. It was something more specific, the look of a person who has been seen fully, including the parts they did not show, and found that the seeing did not result in what they had been bracing for. He did not say anything. Imani was already at the door. Danielle listened to the full account without interrupting. Gerald, the treasurer, groaned. The treasurer had gone home. Reeves sat in the corner with the patient attention of a man who understood he was in a room where something significant was being decided, and that his role was to be available rather than active. Danielle's legal pad filled up. She asked 4 questions at precise intervals: dates, amounts, specific transaction mechanisms, and Si-hyeon answered all 4 with the same completeness he had brought to the previous 22 minutes. When he finished, Danielle put her pen down. She looked at the ceiling briefly. Not in exasperation, in the focused internal calculation of someone running numbers through a framework and checking the output. Voluntary disclosure, she said. Si-hyeon looked at her. The transition period activity, Danielle said. Before Do-yeon surfaces it. Before any investigation reaches it through external means. You disclose it voluntarily to the relevant regulatory bodies, with full documentation of the legal restructuring intent, the framework under which the asset movements were made, and the timeline showing the completion of the separation process. She looked at him. Voluntary disclosure of activity you've already legally resolved is a fundamentally different animal than discovered evidence of ongoing criminal conduct. It demonstrates good faith. It removes Do-yeon's leverage entirely because he cannot threaten you with surfacing information you've already surfaced yourself. It also invites scrutiny of the transition process, Si-hyeon said. Yes, Danielle said. Scrutiny you can survive, because the transition is complete and the intent is documentable. She paused. Can you survive the scrutiny? With the right legal support, Si-hyeon said yes. Then that's what we do. She picked up the pen again. I'll need every document relating to the transition process. Every decision memo, every transaction record, every legal opinion you received during those 18 months. All of it. In my office by Monday morning. It will be there, Si-hyeon said. Danielle looked at Imani. Are you all right with this direction? I'm not his attorney, Imani said. No. But you're in this room and you've been in these situations since last night, and I want to know if you have objections before we move forward, because you are the person Do-yeon has been using as leverage, and your read on this matters. Imani thought about it for exactly the amount of time it required. It's the right move, she said. It's what someone does when they're actually trying to be finished with something, instead of just saying they are. Danielle nodded once. Then we move. The next 4 days were the most exhausting of Imani's adult life, which was a significant claim, given that she had spent 4 years married to a Korean organized crime leader, while maintaining a full professional career and pretending to herself that the two realities of her life did not create a constant, low-frequency pressure that she carried everywhere. Danielle filed the voluntary disclosure on a Friday morning. She submitted it simultaneously to the relevant financial regulatory authorities, the State Attorney General's office, and the federal prosecutors handling what had become a formal investigation into Harbor Haven's compromised financial infrastructure. The submission was comprehensive, precisely documented, and accompanied by a legal memorandum that Danielle had worked on for 31 continuous hours, and that ran to 68 pages. Si-hyeon was interviewed 3 times in the following week. Imani was interviewed twice, once about the Harbor Haven records she had found, and once about the sequence of events from her arrest through the board session. Her testimony was consistent, detailed, and supported by the security footage from Harbor Haven system that Reeves had immediately preserved, which showed clearly the 2 men who had been present in the back office on the night of her arrest, and which showed equally clearly the moment when one of those men's hands were in her coat pockets. The theft charge was formally dismissed on a Tuesday. The dismissal was not announced. There was no press release. Danielle sent Imani a text message at 9:47 in the morning that said, "It's done." Imani was in her Capitol Hill apartment, drinking coffee when she received it. She read it twice. She set the phone down. She finished her coffee, looking out her window at the Capitol Hill street below, which was doing its ordinary morning thing, people walking. A delivery truck double-parked, 2 women with a stroller stopped in conversation on the corner. She called her sister that afternoon, a long call. She did not explain everything, she explained enough, which was a different thing. Her sister listened with the specific quality of attention that older siblings brought to accounts of younger siblings' lives, when they had long suspected things were more complicated than they were being told. "Are you safe?" her sister asked. "Yes," Imani said. "Are you actually safe? Or are you doing that thing where you manage my worry by giving me the answer I need?" Imani was quiet for a moment. "Actually safe," she said. And sigh another pause. "We're talking, Imani." "I know," she said. Baek Do-yoon's financial network began unraveling in the 3rd week. It did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened the way financial fraud investigations has always happened, methodically, through the accumulated weight of documentation, account tracing, and the cooperative testimony of people who, once the structure protecting them disappeared, found that the alternative to cooperation was significantly worse. Park Sung-jin was the first to cooperate formally. He had, Danielle told Imani, apparently understood from the Harbor Haven board session, concluded that the architecture he and Do-yoon had built was compromised beyond repair, and had made the calculation that early cooperation produced better outcomes than loyalty to a man who had already proven willing to use people as positioning tools. Do-yoon himself was a different matter. He did not cooperate. He did not flee, which surprised Si-hyeon slightly. He retained 4 attorneys and said very little to anyone, and spent 3 weeks in a posture of expensive legal defense while the investigation assembled itself around him from the documentation that multiple cooperating witnesses, the Harbor Haven forensic accounting firm, and the FinCEN submission collectively produced. Imani heard about his eventual arrest from Danielle by phone on a Wednesday morning, 5 weeks after the night she had walked out of a holding facility and found her ex-husband waiting in a plastic chair. "Done," Danielle said. Do-yoon is in custody. His attorneys will keep him out of an orange jumpsuit for a while, but the financial case is solid enough that the outcome is not meaningfully in doubt. Imani was walking through the Pike Place market when the call came. She had started doing this, walking through the market in the early morning before the tourist volume built up, partly because the cold, salt air did something useful for her thinking, and partly because it was the kind of ordinary thing she had stopped allowing herself during the years when ordinary things felt incompatible with the life she was living. "Thank you," Imani said, "for everything." "Thank yourself," Danielle said. "You were the one who copied the records. You were the one who sat in front of that board for 40 minutes and reconstructed financial data from memory." A pause. I've had a lot of clients in difficult situations. Very few of them kept their heads as well as you did. After the call, Imani stood at the edge of the market's upper level and looked out at Elliott Bay. The water was gray-green and choppy. A container ship was moving slowly toward the port. The rain had held off for the morning, which in Seattle in this season was the meteorological equivalent of a gesture of goodwill. She thought about the 4 years of her marriage. She thought about the woman she had been during those years, not a victim, not naive, but a person who had made a series of choices about what she was willing to carry and what she was willing to not ask about, and who had eventually arrived at the point where she could no longer carry the weight of what she didn't know and could not continue not asking. Ziwud Scene. She thought about the night 3 months before the arrest, when she had sat across from Si-hyeon in his attorney's office and signed papers that she had told herself were the end of something that had simply stopped being sustainable. She had not stopped loving him when she signed those papers. She had stopped being able to live in a house where the floors were not entirely solid. She had not yet decided what she was going to do with the fact that the floors were different now. She had not yet decided, but she was thinking about it. That was different from where she had been 6 weeks ago. She bought a coffee from the market and walked back toward Capitol Hill in the cold morning air. The first dinner happened on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after Do-yoon's arrest. Si-hyeon had called and asked. He had not framed it as anything except what it was. He wanted to have dinner with her. He was asking if she was willing, and he understood if she wasn't. The call lasted 4 minutes. Imani said she would think about it and called him back 2 hours later and said yes. The restaurant was not expensive. She had told him when she called back that she didn't want somewhere with a wine list that cost more than her monthly rent. He had found a place in Fremont that served Korean-American food, and that had the specific warm noise level of a restaurant full of people eating well and enjoying themselves. They sat across from each other at a table near the window, with their coats on the empty chairs beside them, and menus they both looked at for longer than necessary, because looking at the menu was something to do while the first minutes of being in. The same room by choice, without crisis, settled around them. They ordered. The food came. It was good. "How is the Haedong process going?" Imani said. "Slowly," Si-hyeon said. "The voluntary disclosure has produced the scrutiny Danielle anticipated. It will take several more months before the regulatory review is complete." He ate something. "The legitimate companies are operating. The criminal infrastructure is gone permanently. Not in the way I had always told myself it eventually would be, but never committed to a timeline for. Gone. Who took it over?" She said. "Nobody," he said. "I dismantled it instead of transferring it. There is no successor. There are no lieutenants inheriting anything." He looked at her. "I want you to understand that, because it matters. It was not the way I originally planned to exit. The original plan was a controlled transition to legitimate operations that preserved the organizational structure under different direction. And now the structure doesn't exist." He paused. "It was a harder decision than I expected. Not because I regretted it. Because I had built it, my father had built it, and I had continued it and then rebuilt it. And dismantling something you built, even something that needed to be dismantled, has a weight that I don't think I would have understood before I did it." Imani looked at him. "Are you telling me you miss it?" "No," he said. "I'm telling you. It cost something to end it, and I want to be honest about that cost instead of pretending it didn't exist." He held her gaze. "I am not going to be the man who tells you everything was easy and clean when it wasn't." "Good," she said, "because I've met that man. He's exhausting." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Almost. They ate. The conversation moved through several subjects, her consulting work, which had continued through the entire period of the investigation, with the specific momentum of professional life that does not pause for personal upheaval, his transition process. Danielle, whom Imani was planning to refer 2 colleagues to because she was the best attorney Imani had encountered in 15 years of professional dealings. Harbor Haven, which had survived under new independent oversight. Client programs intact, its reputation damaged but not destroyed. "Marcia stayed," Imani said. "The office manager. I called her last week." "I know," Si-hyeon said. Imani looked at him. Reeves mentioned it, he said. He stays in contact with Danielle. She has mentioned it to me. You're asking Danielle about me, Imani said. No, he said. Danielle mentions things she thinks I should know. I do not ask her to, and she would not report back on you in any way that felt like surveillance. She's made that clear in a way that I found both appropriate and slightly frightening. Danielle is frightening in the right contexts, Imani said. Yes, Si-hyeon agreed. The restaurant noise moved around them. Someone at a nearby table was laughing at something their companion had said, a real laugh, the kind that surprised the person doing it. Outside the window, Fremont continued its evening at the specific tempo of a Seattle neighborhood that had retained enough of its original character to feel like somewhere rather than nowhere. I want to ask you something, Si-hyeon said. Imani set her fork down. All right. Not about the investigation. Not about the legal process. He was looking at the table, and then he looked up at her, and his face was doing something she had not seen it do during any of the crisis hours of the past 6 weeks. It was unguarded in the specific way of someone who has decided not to manage the outcome of a moment and is living with the exposure that decision creates. I want to know if you are doing all right, not functionally all right. Actually all right. Imani looked at him. Because the last 6 weeks, he said, were not something I asked you to go through. They were something that happened to you because of decisions I made years ago, and choices I made, and things I put in place without your knowledge. And I want to know not to fix it, not to assess what it requires of me. I want to know how you are. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her fork and ate something, and set it back down. Some nights I'm angrier than other nights, she said. Not at you specifically, at the whole shape of it. At the fact that I spent 4 years inside a situation where I was carrying risk I hadn't agreed to carry, and even now that it's resolved, I am aware that it's resolved, which means I was aware of it while it was happening, and she stopped. Started again. I managed it. I absorbed it into my daily functioning and told myself it was the price of loving someone complicated. And I don't entirely know yet what to do with the fact that I did that. What do you need to do with it? Si-hyeon said. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'm figuring it out. A pause, that's an actual answer, not a deflection. I know, he said. I can tell the difference now. She looked at him. Can you? I've had 6 weeks to practice, he said. I'm not good at it yet, but I'm practicing. After dinner, they walked along the canal for a while, because the rain had held off again, and the night air was cold and clear in the way Seattle nights occasionally surprised you with, and walking seemed like the right activity for the specific texture of the conversation they were having on urgent, but not present, but not pressured. They walked without touching, close enough that she was aware of his presence beside her. In the specific physical way she had always been aware of him, the height, the steadiness, the quality of his movement that had always read as someone entirely comfortable occupying the space they were in. I don't know what this is, Imani said at one point. What we're doing, neither do I, Si-hyeon said. Doesn't bother you? It would have, he said. Before. Not knowing the parameters of something, not knowing its shape or direction or likely outcome, that used to be a condition I managed by controlling the variables until the outcome became predictable. He looked out at the water. I don't have that option with you. You've made that very clear. And I'm finding that not having that option is, he paused. It's uncomfortable, and it's real in a way that the controllable version was not. Imani was quiet for a moment. That's the most emotionally coherent thing you've said to me in 4 years of knowing you. I've had help, he said. From who? From the last 6 weeks, he said. And from you. And from the specific experience of watching everything I built to feel safe get stripped down to its actual structure and realizing the structure was holding up better than I expected. He looked at her. The parts that are holding up are the parts I built toward you. Everything else I'm still clearing. Imani looked at the water. The canal reflected the canal side lights in the moving way of water that was never entirely still. I'm not moving back into your penthouse, she said. I know, I'm not resuming anything. Not yet. Maybe eventually, but not yet, and not on a timeline. I know, he said. And if at any point you make a decision about my life without asking me. I know, he said. Imani. I know, she looked at him. He was looking at her with the full attention, The real attention, the kind that had always made her feel like the most important thing in the room. And this time, unlike the other times, she did not immediately look for what was behind it. She let it be what it appeared to be. "Okay," she said. They walked back toward the restaurant where their cars were parked. At the corner where they needed to separate, they stopped. "Coffee," Si-hyeon said. "No, not dinner." "Coffee." "Where?" Imani said. "Wherever you want." She thought about it. "The market," she said. "The place on the corner. 9 o'clock." 9 o'clock, he said. She nodded, turned toward her car, stopped Si-hyeon. He turned back. "You told me the truth tonight," she said. "All of it, including the parts that cost you something to say." She looked at him steadily in the cold Fremont air with the canal behind her and the ordinary Thursday evening of a city going on around them. "That matters. I want you to know that it matters." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I know," he said quietly. Turned and walked to her car. She did not look back. But she was aware, in the specific way she had always been aware of him, that he watched her go, not the way he used to watch her, cataloging threats and calculating distances, and managing the perimeter of her safety from the inside of his own controlled architecture. He watched her the way people watched something they were not trying to own, or contain, or protect against every possible outcome. He watched her leave and did not follow, and did not send anyone after her, and did not call for 20 minutes after her car pulled away. When he did call, it was to tell her he had gotten home safely, which she had not asked him to do. She looked at the text for a moment. Then she typed back, "Good." And then, after a pause, she added, "Me too." In the months that followed, the pieces arranged themselves into something that did not resemble the life she had lived during the marriage. Quieter, in some ways, more complicated in others, honest in the specific way that honesty was when it cost something, and you maintained it anyway. Harbor Haven's programs continued. New financial oversight, independent auditors, a sound like green wood splitting, a governance that Reeves had restructured with the purposeful energy of a man who felt personally accountable for what had happened in his organization and was going to make sure it could not happen again. Imani returned to Saturday morning, volunteering in the spring. She helped a different office manager with a different database, migration, and this time she read every record she touched with the attention of someone who had learned exactly what could be hidden in the ordinary flow of institutional data. Hedong Meridian Group's regulatory review concluded in the early spring. The voluntary disclosure had done what Danielle said it would do: demonstrated good faith, documented intent, produced scrutiny that the actual structure of the transition could survive. There were fines. There were required remediation steps. There was a period of ongoing oversight that would last 2 years. There was no criminal charge against Si-hyeon, which was not the same as there being no cost. The cost was significant and specific, and he paid it without complaint, which Danielle told Imani in one of their occasional professional conversations was the most strategically intelligent thing a person in his position could have done, and also, she suspected, not primarily strategic. Dooyeon's case moved through the federal system with the specific, methodical patience of a large financial fraud prosecution. Park Sung-jin's cooperation had been extensive, and his testimony was, by all accounts, precise. The outcome was not in doubt by the summer. It was a matter of timeline. Si-hyeon and Imani had coffee at the Pike Place Market Corner shop on 9 consecutive Tuesdays before Imani agreed to dinner again. On the 12th dinner, she told him she had been talking to a therapist, had been since the month after the Harbor Haven situation resolved, and that the process was difficult and productive in the way of things that were worth doing. Because they were difficult, rather than despite it. Si-hyeon said he had started the same process 6 months earlier. Imani looked at him across the dinner table. "You're in therapy?" "Yes. Since before we started having coffee." "Since 3 weeks after everything resolved," he said. "Danielle recommended someone. I was reluctant. But you went." "I went," he said. "And then I went again." He paused, looking for the word that was accurate rather than the word that was comfortable. "Instructive. In what way?" "In the way of being told, by a person whose professional function is to be honest with you, without any competing interest in the answer, that several of the things you believed were protection were control. And that control dressed as protection is still control, and the person it protected most was yourself. He looked at her. That specific conversation happened in the third session. I sat with it for about a week before I could say it out loud to anyone. You're saying it to me now, Imani said. I'm saying it to you now, he confirmed. The restaurant was warm. Outside, Seattle was doing what Seattle did in the summer, converting the gray palette of the other 9 months into something golden and improbable that made the people who lived here feel, for a few weeks each year, like the city had been keeping a version of itself in reserve and had finally decided to show it. What do you want? Imani said, not as a challenge, as a real question. Si-hyeon looked at her, really looked the way he had always looked at her when he wasn't managing the moment. I want to be someone you can trust, he said. Not trust the way you trust a structure, that will hold trust the way you trust a person who makes mistakes and accounts for them and doesn't build the mistakes into the architecture. He paused. I want to earn that. I don't want to claim it. Imani was quiet for a moment. You already started, she said. He looked at her. 6 weeks ago, you told me the truth, when it would have been easier not to, she said. In a boardroom in a shelter in Sodo at 8 o'clock at night when we had been awake for 20 hours, and you had every reason to manage what I knew for another 12 hours until the legal situation was stable. She held his gaze. You didn't, you told me. That was the start. It wasn't enough, he said. No, she agreed. It wasn't enough. It was a start. She picked up her wine glass. I've been thinking about a word for what happened to us. Not what went wrong, I know what went wrong. But what the thing was that made it hard to leave even when I knew I needed to. She looked at the glass. I kept calling it love, and it was love. But it was love inside a structure that made it very difficult to tell the difference between being loved and being managed. She looked up. I need those things to be separable. I need to be able to feel loved without feeling managed. I don't know yet if that's possible with you. I don't know either, Si-hyeon said. I think it is. I think I'm different enough now that it is. But I can't promise that because I'm still in the process of becoming it. Imani nodded slowly. That's honest. It's the most honest thing I can say. She set the glass down. Then keep saying honest things, she said. And we'll figure out the rest as it comes. The walk they took that night was longer than the previous walks. Down to the waterfront, along the promenade where the city had rebuilt the seawall and opened the space to foot traffic, with the sound on one side and the lit city on the other. It was a Tuesday evening in late summer, and there were other people walking, couples, families, a man with a dog who was very interested in a particular section of railing, and the ordinary presence of other lives going on around them had the specific comforting quality of being reminded that the world was larger than any given set of circumstances. They walked close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. Once, Si-hyeon's hand found hers, not deliberately, or not only deliberately. Kind of contact that happens between people whose bodies remember each other even when the minds are still working out the terms. She did not pull away. They walked like that for a while. Then she let go, not because something was wrong, but because nothing needed to be fixed right now, and the walking itself was enough. They stopped near the end of the promenade where the path curved back toward the market district. The water was very dark, and the lights of the port were orange and distant, and a container ship was moving slowly through the sound toward the open water beyond, guided by 2 small tugs whose patience looked, from this distance, like wisdom. I used to watch ships from my window, Si-hyeon said, after the divorce. To have something to look at that wasn't the city. What did it do for you? Imani said. It reminded me that large things moved slowly, he said. That getting from one place to another took time and required guidance, and didn't always go in a straight line. Imani looked at the ship. It was moving with the particular unhurried certainty of something that understood its own weight. Yeah, she said. It does. They stood there for a while. The city hummed behind them. The water moved in its own indifferent rhythm. The ship continued toward wherever it was going, slow and certain, and entirely committed to the direction it had chosen. Coffee next week, Si-hyeon said. Coffee next week, Imani said. She looked at him once more, the full look, the real one, the kind she gave to things she was deciding how to hold. And then she looked back at the water, and the moving ship, and the dark open sound beyond. And she stood beside him in the ordinary and perfect evening of a city that had held fearful story without knowing it. And she breathed in the salt air, and she let the moment be what it was. Not a resolution, not an ending, not the clean closing of something that had required too much of both of them to be closed cleanly. A direction, something large, moving slowly, with two people on it who had finally, after all the secrets and the damage and the long expensive work of becoming honest with each other, decided to face the same way.